Before we convene, I would like to remind everyone present that the board is a consumer protection agency charged with administering and enforcing the board's laws. Where protection of the public is inconsistent with other interests sought to be promoted, the protection of the public shall be paramount. The Board of Behavioral Sciences will be holding this public meeting in person and via WebEx platform. I will announce when we are accepting public comments on the various issues. For each public comment period, we will first be accepting comments from the participants in the audience present in the room. Then the moderator will open the lines as appropriate so that the remote audience members can comment. Each commenter will have 2 minutes to comment. Moderator, would you please provide the audience instructions on how they may participate during the meeting at the appropriate times?
When it is time for public comment, we're going to ask that everyone raise their hand. You can do that by tapping the hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users can dial *3 to raise their hand.
David, your audio is really low up there.
And for our mobile device users, you may need to hit the ellipses button. That's the ... in order to find your hand. People will be given 2 minutes to speak, and I'll give you a 15-second warning before your time expires. Back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Members, during the roll call, please introduce yourself and let the public know whether you are a public or licensed member. I will note that Nick Boyd will be participating remotely today. Christina, please call roll to establish a quorum.
Good morning. Dr. Annette Walker.
Good morning, present. Public board member, pronouns she, her.
Eleanor Uribe.
Good morning, present. LCSW member.
Susan Friedman.
Good morning, public member, present.
John Sovek.
Present, LMFT member, pronouns he, him.
Wendy Strack.
Present, public member, vice chair of the board.
Christopher Jones.
Present, LEP member, chair, pronouns are he, him.
Justin Huft.
Present, LMFT, he, him.
Abigail Ortega.
Present, LCSW member.
Dr. Nicholas Boyd.
Present, LPCC member. Thank you.
And for the record, Kelly Ranasinghe and Lorez Bailey are absent. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Christina. Before we begin, I would like to note that we will be discussing item 21, board sunset review update, and on item 23, overview of board's fund condition after item number 29. Additionally, we will be taking a lunch break as close to 11:30 as we can. This will be depending on where we are with the agenda.
Correction. I apologize, Chris. I misinformation on your script. Actually, the second item, instead of the fund condition, that will be in position as it was. We will be discussing the board member manual last, in one of the last parts. So,
okay.
22 still in order.
So we have, let me look at the things.
Sunset review update.
Sunset review update 21 and 23 are going to be pushed back.
That's what it.
No, because it was board fund, just the title. Sorry.
All right. Thank you, Steve. Next on the agenda is introductions. Board staff, would you please introduce yourselves?
Steve Sodergren, Executive Officer of the Board.
Christy Berger, regulatory manager for the board.
Roseanne Helms, legislative manager for the board.
Good morning, Marlon McManus, assistant executive officer for the board.
All right, thank you. Oh, sorry.
Sabina Knight, legal counsel.
Now it is time for the public to introduce themselves if they would like to. This is voluntary. Is there anyone in our audience that would like to introduce themselves?
Good morning, Shanti Ezrin with the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists.
Good morning, Ben Caldwell, MFT.
Thank you, welcome. Is there anyone in our remote audience that would like to introduce themselves?
All right, now is the time to raise your hand. You can do so by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users, dial *3 to raise your hand. And it looks like our first request is coming from Sarah Carrasco. Hold on just a moment. Hopefully I said that correctly. We'll give you an opportunity to say it yourself.
Yes, you did. Good morning. Sarah Krasko, licensure and compliance specialist at William Jessup University. Happy to be here.
And that appears to be our only request online.
All right, thank you, moderator. Next on our agenda, item number 15, the board chair report. For board member attendance, this report shows the board member attendance for board meetings and committee meetings during the last fiscal year. Please let staff know if you believe there are errors. As a reminder, attendance at board and committee meetings is very important. Future board meetings, you will see in the materials the list of all the upcoming board meetings. Now we'd like to move to staff recognitions. We have a few staff members that we would like to introduce for their years of service to the state of California. Paul Drabkin has served for 5 years and is currently part of the board's discipline and probe unit. Priscilla Sazo has served for 5 years and is currently part of the consumer complaint unit. Veronica Rosas has served 5 years and is currently part of the licensing unit. Portia Hillman has served for 10 years and is currently part of the administration unit. Ellen Viegas has served for 15 years and is currently part of the board's examination unit. Butcher this name. Roman Mikulchek has served for 15 years and is currently part of the board's cashiering unit. Thank you for all the work that you do and congratulations. Also, congratulations. All right. You want to do we're going to move on, right?
I think so. We had some retirements that we are going to recognize. Some individuals were going to be joining us today, so not here yet. So if it's okay with you, can we move on to the board DCA update?
Absolutely. Next on our agenda, Department of Consumer Affairs update. Judy Bucciarelli. I'm butchering names all day today. I apologize. Judy Bucciarelli from DCA's Legislation Affairs will be presenting an update on the Department of Consumer Affairs. Judy, floor is yours.
Good morning.
Morning.
Morning, Chair Jones, board members, board staff. My name is Judy Bucciarelli from the California Department of Consumer Affairs Board and Bureau Relations. Thank you for the opportunity to join your meeting this morning. First, I have an update on the governor's 2025-26 proposed state budget. Governor Newsom released his proposed 25-26 state budget on January 10th, which included 8 budget change proposals for DCA boards and bureaus. Additionally, DCA's vacancy reduction and government efficiency plans were approved by the Department of Finance and may be made official in the spring revisions. The governor remains committed to funding resources to address California's housing and homelessness crisis. Included in the governor's proposed budget is a creation of a dedicated California Housing and Homeless Agency. The Department of Consumer Affairs and other regulators currently under the Business and Consumer Services and Housing Agency would form a consumer protection agency. This is an extraordinary opportunity for DCA to better align with other consumer protection entities as one consumer protection agency. With the Consumer Protection Agency Secretary within the governor's cabinet, this is an exciting opportunity that will only strengthen our mission, momentum, and delivery of services to California. The governor's reorganization proposal will be reviewed by the nonpartisan Little Hoover Commission and the legislature in the spring. As more information is available, DCA will continue to keep board leadership updated. Next, I have an update related to Form 700 filing changes. The governor signed AB 1170, which requires board members to file their Form 700s electronically with the Fair Political Practice Commission, which I'll refer to as the FPPC, using the FPPC's electronic filing system. Effective January 1st of this year, DCA board members must file Form 700s through the FPPC's online system. Filings will no longer be filed via the NetFile portal that DCA board members have been using for many years. Additionally, paper filings will no longer be accepted. On January 2nd, 2025, the FPPC emailed all board members with a link to the portal along with login information. As a reminder, the annual Form 700 filing deadline is Tuesday, April 1st, 2025. Please contact Board and Bureau Relations with any questions regarding the new requirements. That email address is memberrelations@dca.ca.gov. Next, I have an update about the Board and Bureau Relations team. Yvonne Durante served as Assistant Deputy Director of Board and Bureau Relations since October of 2022. On December 6th, the governor appointed Yvonne as the Assistant Deputy Director of Legislative and Government Affairs at the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services. Yvonne's last day at DCA was December 31st. We appreciate her dedication to Board and Bureau Relations and wish her well in her new role. In addition, Melissa Gear will be leaving DCA Board and Bureau Relations at the end of today. Melissa has served as Deputy Director of BBR since 2022. Governor Newsom has appointed her to Deputy Director of Legislative and Governmental Affairs at the Department of Healthcare Access and Information. We appreciate her dedication to Board and Bureau Relations and wish her well in her new role at HCI. In closing, I would like to share a message from the DCA Director. Director Kirchmeier would like to thank the board and staff for their hard work and partnership last year. She is excited about 2025 and the many opportunities that await us. In addition, she would also like to thank the members of the board and the staff for your dedicated service that protects California's consumers every day. This concludes the report today. I appreciate your time this morning. At this time, I'll turn the floor back to Chair Jones, and I welcome any questions from the board.
Thank you, Judy. Do we have any comments or questions from our board members? Dr. Walker.
Yes, good morning, Ms.
Bucciarelli.
It was here, it was here. It just didn't come out. Bucciarelli.
Yes.
Good morning, and thank you again for this very informative update that you've provided us today. And you've
Welcome.
done this before, so again, we always welcome you and the Department of Consumer Affairs updates. I guess that was my comment to you, but my question is to staff and legal, whoever can help me answer a question for a consumer. I had a public member reach out to me and just wanted to have the background on your updates, but it's like I'm like, they're just updates. But when they read the agenda, it reads as, it says that the Department of Consumer Affairs DCA report, which may include updates on the DCA's administrative services, blah, 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 kind of confused that consumer. So I told, can we just share why it's posted this way on the agenda and the language that is used? Thank you.
Yes, so DCA, Board and Bureau Relations, always sends a representative to update the board, every board at every meeting with, sorry, all sorts of topics that might be included in this list. It's included, it could be personnel, it could be your Form 700 filing, it could be, hey, make sure you do your trainings, board members, right? It could be staffing changes, it could be new legislation, it could be new changes in processes. They include the word report and update in that agenda item as it is a verbal report. There isn't normally so for example, sometimes you might have other updates or presentations or things without, sorry?
Like we have one.
Right, that you're not going to see materials in the posted materials, right? So a lot of times we have verbal updates from constituents or associations and that's standard across all boards. So you're not going to see materials posted ahead of time for every single item, right? And it's not required.
Yeah,
either.
it's really just for clarity, I think, was because before it was just the DCA update. So yeah, it adds a little more clarity. So.
Right, what they could talk about, which may include all of these items, or maybe only 2 of them. You may hear from them on maybe 2 or 3 of the items listed or topics. And also it's very fluid. like she said, like some of the changes are happening today, so it would be very difficult to post materials, ahead of time if she's potentially getting new information the morning of or the day before.
Yeah, so I think they were just looking for the background materials like we have on some of the other items. And Christina may want to chime in here, but so it's semantics and language here. So it's not really a report. You're reporting out updates, but it's not per se a report. And this particular person was looking for, well, where's the report? I'm like, there is no report. She's just providing us a verbal update. So I think they maybe got caught up in the language here, but this is like our legal counsel just mentioned, this is just how it's written. Yeah.
And it's an update and report. Yeah, it's the update part of that sentence. That's really, yeah, an update can.
So I'm sure this person is watching now, and so I hope that explains why we agendize this item in this way. If not, please again, reach out to me and I'll follow up with Steve or our legal counsel and get your
Dr. Walker,
questions
in the
answered.
future, what I can do is put a cover page under those agenda items to indicate that it will be a verbal update provided at the meeting.
I think
if
that will
that's
be helpful for the community. Yeah, thank you.
I'll do that.
Awesome.
Thank you, Dr. Walker.
Thank you.
Any further questions from our board members or comments? Have any comments from our members in the audience? Oh, do we have any comments from our online participants?
We are open for public comment via WebEx on agenda item 16. If you'd like to make a comment on the DCA report, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users, dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to continue with the agenda?
Yes, thank you, moderator. All right, thank you, Judy. We appreciate it. Okay, next on our agenda, item number 17, Workforce Development Committee update. Oh, I'm sorry, that's not what we're going to do next. Yep, we're going to pause on that, and Steve is going to do his presentation.
Sorry, as part of the the chairman's report, we were going to recognize some other people that are retiring, some staff members. So I'm going to make them stand up.
He's gonna go and make them.
I might have. They want to stand with me. So, Mary. Mic drop. Is that a good mic drop? Hi.
Hey.
There we go. So this is Mary Cotto. I'm going to read the retirement resolution that we have here, but 47 years of state service. I think it's a record. We're here too, from highest to lowest, but that doesn't make a difference. So we have this document, or we have this resolution for you. I'm going to have to
My desk, and I'll bring it right back.
Don't close it. I'm going to have to read. It's good to see you. Whereas Mary Cotto has dedicated over 47 years of exemplary service to the people of the state of California across various departments and roles. Whereas throughout her distinguished career, Mary has served served the California Department of Motor Vehicles, the California Department of Justice, the California Department of Water Resources, the California Department of Healthcare Services, the Department of Consumer Affairs, the California Board of Registered Nursing, and the best of all, the California Board of Behavioral Sciences, consistently demonstrating unwavering commitment to her professionalism and excellence in her work. And whereas Mary began her tenure with the Board of Behavioral Sciences in 1991 as an office technician, then advanced to the role of management service technician, where she diligently supported the examination candidates through accommodation process and ensured they receive exceptional customer service. And whereas Mary's deep compassion and unwavering commitment to treating each exam candidate with the utmost respect and care have had a lasting impact, significantly enhancing the board's ability to meet the diverse needs of its licensees. And whereas Mary's steadfast support of the board staff, her willingness to go above and beyond to ensure the success of the board's operation, and her collaborative approach fostered a positive and supportive environment for her colleagues and management alike. Whereas, more whereas, board's many accomplishments and success in fulfilling its mandate would have not been possible without Mary's tireless work ethic, dedication, and commitment to public service. And whereas Mary's colleagues hold her in the highest esteem, deeply respecting her professionalism, integrity, and profound lasting impact she has made within the board and the broader communities it serves. Now, therefore, it's resolved that the California Department of Consumer Affairs, Kimberly Kirkmeyer, and the Board of Behavioral Sciences Executive Officer Steve Sodergren, by token of this resolution and on behalf of the Department, Board, and State of California, congratulate Mary on the occasion of her retirement, commend her for her outstanding record of service, and extend best wishes for the success and fulfillment in all her endeavors. And be it further resolved that a suitably prepared copy of this resolution has been presented to Mary Cotto.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Give you the mic.
You know what? For the Board of Behavior Sciences, what my key factor was communication. I have had lupus, which is a disability, and working with the accommodation unit, I've learned a lot for myself. But working with the candidates, I've learned a lot of accommodations. And I think the key was communications and speaking with them on a level that they're not understanding of, say, the employees not understanding that they don't know what a disability is. A lot of times I would tell them, I have a disability and I know where you're at and I know your level. So now we can talk to each other at a level. And our communication was great then. It brought them from here down to here. The yelling was here, but it brought them down to here. Communication was a key for me. And I love the personality. I went to this in New York because I also worked on Wall Street. I went to this workshop and it said the key to life is a handshake and talking to each other and communication. I was a suicide counselor. He was communication. The Board of Behavior Sciences, this is how I was able to go so many years. And I wouldn't have stopped, but a lot of the people kept saying, you're not paying me, I'm paying you to work for you. So I had to stop. But I love people. I'm a people person. And the board, I love you to death.
Next, Cynthia. Can you, yeah, you're not, you love being up here, huh? This is Cynthia Burnett. Whereas Cynthia Burnett has faithfully dedicated over 26 years of exemplary service to the people of the state of California in various capacities, and whereas throughout her distinguished career, Cynthia has served the Department of Healthcare Services, the Department of Public Health, and once again, best of all, the Board of Behavioral Sciences, demonstrating unwavering commitment and enhanced excellence in her work. And whereas Cynthia began her tenure with the Board of Behavioral Sciences in 2008 as an enforcement analyst in the Consumer Complaint Unit, where she diligently investigated complaints to uphold the board's mission of consumer protection, ensuring the public's trust in the board's regulatory functions. And whereas Cynthia was promoted in, well, she came back too, so that was good. Thank you for coming back. Whereas Cynthia was promoted in 2020 to staff service manager, skillfully overseeing a multidisciplinary team consisting of the board's cashiering, registration, and examination unit, empowering the team to excel in delivering the highest standards of customer service and operational excellence. And whereas Cynthia's exceptional leadership, positivity, unwavering dedication significantly contributed to the board's ability to meet its diverse needs of licensees while fostering a collaborative and supportive environment for her peers and management. And whereas the board's accomplishment and success in fulfilling its mandates would not have been possible without Cynthia's tireless work ethic and commitment to public service. And whereas Cynthia's colleagues deeply respect and admire her for her professionalism, integrity, and lasting impact she has made with the board and the communities it serves. And now, therefore, it be resolved that the California Department of Consumer Affairs, Kimberly Kirkmeyer, and the Board of Behavioral Sciences Officer Steve Sodergren, by token of this resolution and on behalf of the Department, Board, and State of California, congratulate Cynthia Burnett on the occasion of her retirement, commend her for her outstanding record of service, and extend best wishes for the success and fulfillment in all her endeavors, and be it further resolved that a suitably prepared copy of this resolution be presented to you. Congratulations.
Thank you. I really appreciate this. I just wanted to make a comment that the years that I've served the state of California have been very fulfilling. First with Department of Public Health for 10 years, and then here with Consumer Affairs. It was just always fulfilling to me to know that I was part of the big picture of protecting the health, safety, and welfare of California's consumers, and especially their vulnerable population here with the board. So it's been a pleasure, and I've worked with some great people. I'll miss them, but it's time. Thank you.
Thank you. Portia. Should have some water up here. I'm sorry if I'm going to stumble, but hopefully we won't do that. Good to see you again. Thanks for coming down. So, whereas Portia Hillman has served the state of California for more than 11 years, and whereas Portia has served as an office assistant with the Board of Behavioral Sciences since she began her career in the public service in 2014, which is great. She's only worked for our board. So whereas Portia's exceptional positivity, steadfast dedication, and collaborative spirit were instrumental in the board's success in addressing the diverse needs of its licensees and delivering the highest level of service to both licensees and consumer, whereas the board's accomplishment and success in fulfilling its mandate would not have been possible without Portia's tireless work ethic and commitment to public service, whereas Portia's colleagues deeply respect and admire her for her professionalism, integrity, and lasting impact she has made with the board and the communities it serves, now therefore be it resolved that Department of Consumer Affairs Director Kimberly Kirkmeyer, the Board of Behavioral Sciences Steve Sodergren, by token of this resolution and on behalf of the Department, Board, and State of California, congratulate Portia on the occasion of her retirement, commend her for her outstanding record of service, and extend best wishes for success and fulfillment in all her endeavors, and be it further resolved that a suitably prepared copy of this resolution be presented to Portia Hillman.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Want to say something? I'd say just a little bit.
Okay.
Thank you, board, for taking the time out to recognize us. I love this board. Like Steve said, I've been here since 2014. This is my second rodeo. I did 30 years with Bank of America as an assistant vice president of wire transfer investigations. And it was a very challenging job for 30 years. We implemented the online banking services that you guys use now. And but this family here, I call them family because it's no other board. I tell all the newcomers coming into the board, this is the best board ever. We have a lot of working hard people in our board. They are dedicated to what they do. And the management team here at BBS is just outstanding. I don't know if any of you guys know our former EO, Ms. Kim Matson. She was wonderful. She kept this board going. She kept the right people in the right position and had the right people to get promoted up. So I thank you for your time today and have a wonderful weekend.
Oh, Ellen, really quick. Just since we have her in here, I'm sorry. Wow, have your years of service. Okay, we'll present it later. So there we go. Thank you very all. That's a lot of, sorry, I'll give it to you later. A lot of years of service there, and they've been critical for, the operations of the board. So congratulations, you all. I appreciate you. Thank you very much. So, and enjoy your retirement.
Yes, I would like to echo that. Thank you all for your years of service and supporting our board as we do the work to protect consumers of California. So, and enjoy your retirement. We're all envious. We want to get there too. All right, next on our agenda is the Workforce Development Committee update. Steve, would you please provide us with the report?
Need a drink of water here. So the Workforce Development Committee met in February, and the committee discussed potential changes to the license process to reduce barriers, including adjusting the timeline of clinical exam and the law and ethics exam, setting a 7-year age limit on the exam scores, extending registration and experience we call validity for 7 years, and adding an exception to the private practice restriction with subsequent registration numbers. We'll be talking more about this. That's just a really kind of quick highlights on some of the things we discussed. We also discussed proposing a 3-phase approach to actually implement all these changes. Phase 1 would make general changes such as the flexible timing of the law and ethics exam and extending registration validity. Phase 2, it was a transition to the AMFT national exam for clinical exams if that was approved by the board, another thing we'll be talking about later. And then phase 3 would be allowing clinical exams after completing 800. The proposal currently is after 875 hours of supervised experience, clinical experience. The committee did request more details on the resources and timeline that it would take for each of these phases, kind of like put out a project plan so that we can see the timing and what's involved in each of those so we can have a discussion at the next committee meeting. We also introduced a review of the education requirements. We were looking at doing a holistic review of the education requirements for LMFTs and LPCCs. And what we're looking at there is reviewing in-state and out-of-state programs for best practices and trying to implement standardized requirements for all applicants in their education. We are also, additionally, we would look at possibly, approving educational programs. That's a discussion that was just, we would maybe have it at a further committee meeting, not necessarily this year. And then allowing out-of-state applicants to meet requirements through continuing education and cost instead of going through graduate coursework. So those are some of the things that we talked about there that we're looking at and we're pursuing. The first step is, though, to do a holistic review of kind of what's out there in other jurisdictions and how they list their education requirements to see if we get any ideas from that. The last thing we did in that committee was we reviewed the workforce development goals. And once again, we're going to try to look at timelines and resources. And there's quite a few different goals we have there and seeing if we can put together kind of a project map, and then we can actually work towards really looking at what resources are involved and when we can maybe start implementing those. So that was the report.
Thank you, Steve. It seems like the committee is doing a lot of really good work. Do we have any comments from our board members? No? Any comments from our
I'm sorry,
participants?
Chris, I have a
Sorry,
question,
Nick.
if I may. Sorry about that. Steve, do you know when we'll have a further discussion? I know you said we'll be having further conversations. Do you have a time, like an idea of when that will be?
The next Workforce Development Committee is April 4th. So that's when we would be discussing some more of those.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you, Nick. All right, any comments from our participants in the audience? Any comments from our online participants?
All right, we are open for public comment via WebEx. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users, dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to continue with the agenda?
Yes, thank you, moderator. Next on our agenda, item 18, is the Outreach and Education Committee update. Steve, would you please provide us with the report?
I will. So at the Outreach and Education Committee, we met in February 7th, and the first thing we talked about was staff provided an overview of the committee's role, and it really is trying to advance the goals that we have in our strategic plan, Goal 6. And those goals will focus on enhancing educational resources for licensees and consumers, expanding outreach to diverse populations, strengthening engagement with schools, training programs, and public events, and encouraging broader stakeholder participation in board meetings. The next thing we discussed was current outreach efforts and what the board currently does to provide outreach. And we reviewed websites, social media, and newsletters that we currently use to inform stakeholders. We also discussed outreach events and the publications that we have that are aimed both for licensees and consumers. And there was a lot of good ideas that came up, a lot of strategies. So we'll take a lot of those comments back and bring into the next meeting. The last thing we discussed was the strategic plan, and just kind of focused on the goals, strategic plan, Goal 6. And it really what we were talking about originally, what I was talking about, what the focus of this committee is, really addresses the goals that we're looking at. So I look forward. It was really the initial meeting kickoff, so it was great. There's in moving forward, it was a really broad view of everything. So we're really gonna kind of dig down and bring back more, very focused topics, I believe. So, and that's it.
All right, thank you, Steve. Any questions or comments from our board members? Any questions or comments from our participants here in the audience? Any questions or comments from our remote participants?
We are open for public comment on agenda item 18. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users, dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to continue with the agenda?
Yes, thank you, moderator.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, could I add something to this item? We do want to make a correction at the bottom. It's should note that it's the Outreach and Education Committee meeting, not the Workforce Development Committee meeting, if people are noting that on the memo. And we should also point out that the next Outreach and Education Committee meeting will be held on June 6, 2025.
Oh.
This is online.
Once again, script issues. Yes, June 6th. I really apologize for that.
Thank you.
And thanks for noting that.
All right, thank you, Dr. Walker. Next on our agenda, item number 19, strategic planning overview presented. We don't want to move forward with our strategic plan at all. Presented by Solid. Steve, would you please introduce Solid?
Yeah, just as a quick overview, our current strategic plan ends in 2026. So we're going to have the strategic planning process this year, so that we have a strategic plan starting 2026. And Sarah Arani is here from the Solid unit. I think you helped us conduct the supplemental report too, maybe to the strategic plan. Either way, she is here to show kind of how we're going through the process and what that entails, just as a refresher. The floor is yours.
Hi, I actually did your strategic plan last time, and I did also help with the DI supplemental that I believe you did last year. I wasn't the lead on that one, but I was helping with that one. But for some of you, if you're new to strategic planning, this will be kind of an overview, and for everyone else who's done it before, this will be a little refresher. So I'm gonna take over the presenter. And then if you can see the screens, that would be great. All right. It's moved. All right, so we're going to talk about the what, why, and how of strategic planning. And kind of the purpose of strategic planning. This is a process for you to define a direction for your board and kind of use the resources to achieve your mission and goals. Your strategic plan tells you what your organization is, what it does, and why it does it. Why we conduct strategic planning. The first reason is that it's going to be efficient. It's going to help you conduct your operations efficiently and effectively. It is also legislatively mandated, so that is a very important reason why you would want your strategic plan. It'll also help you achieve short-term and long-term objectives. So how is the strategic plan created? We have a 5-phase process for strategic planning. This includes surveying stakeholders. You'll get a report of those survey results, and then we'll have the strategic planning session to identify what items from that report you want to focus on for next 3 to 5 years, depending on how long you want your strategic plan to be. And this is kind of a roadmap to show you what the full process is. And as you can see, it's pretty lengthy, which is why we're kind of getting the introduction done now and started. The first 2 weeks is this preliminary meeting where you get the introduction. We'll kind of figure out what are the roles and put out our timeline. And then after that's the environmental scan, where we're going to be surveying your stakeholders. I'll be interviewing you, the board members. We'll survey staff as well. And I'll be compiling all the information from that into the report. And if I remember from last time I did strategic planning with y'all, you had a lot of responses. So that's good, though. That means you have more information to work with. Then we'll have the strategic planning session where we'll use that information to figure out, like I said earlier, what you want to focus on for next 3 to 5 years. The plan will get finalized. You'll approve it. And then after that, I work with staff and the leadership at the board to do action planning, where we take each of those objectives and determine, okay, what are the individual steps that go under this? And then you get a fun little tracker that lets you track your progress, and it looks very fancy. All right, and then as you remember also, diversity, equity, and inclusion from the DI supplemental you did last year. Once again, this will be incorporated into the actual strategic planning process this time. You don't have to do it separately. And we'll have those demographic and DEI questions at the end of the survey. It'll also have that analysis in the report. And then once again, we encourage you to, as you're making objectives, to include diversity, equity, and inclusion into them. All right. So strategic planning components. Strategic planning answers a couple questions. Where are we now? Where are we going? And how will we get there? The where are we now are answered by your mission and values in the environmental scan. And right here is your current mission statement. Protect and serve Californians by setting, communicating, and enforcing standards for safe and competent mental health practices. And we will have a couple opportunities to tweak this mission statement. Steve had mentioned wanting to do a survey prior to strategic planning. So I will work with you, Steve, with getting you that finalized survey. And you will also have an opportunity during the actual strategic planning session to modify this mission statement if you feel like it's outdated or you feel like you want to tweak it a little bit. And your mission statement kind of defines like what your goal is and what your mission as an organization is. And these are your values. Your values kind of represent what is valuable to you and kind of presenting that to your stakeholders and to your staff members and saying this is what we feel is important to us as an organization. So you have accountability, customer service, integrity, quality, and respect. And once again, these are things that we can work on prior to strategic planning or during the session to modify these if we feel necessary. And then the environmental scan. This is information for this is broken up into 2 sections. We have information from the internal stakeholders. This is the board members, this is management, this is staff, this is everyone that's kind of like in the board. And then your external stakeholders. These can be consumer groups, these could be associations, licensees, anyone who is affecting the board, could be related boards as well if you wanted to get information from them. And that environmental scan is going to say, okay, this is what your internal stakeholders are feeling about the board, what they feel is good and bad, and this is what your external stakeholders feel is good or bad about it. All right, where are we going? This is answered by your vision statement. Your vision statement is kind of like a perfect utopia. You've completed every single goal that you wanted to do as an organization, and you don't have anything else you need to do. You're perfect. So where do you want to be when you're perfect? And this is the vision statement we came up with last time. Pretty good one, in my opinion. But if we do see an opportunity to make changes to it, once again, we can do that during the strategic planning process or during that survey that's going to go out later. And the where are we going is also answered by your goals. So these are the 6 goal areas. And a lot of times, I'd like to kind of deviate here. A lot of times people get confused about what's the difference between goals and objectives for strategic planning. Well, your goals are a lot more of your day-to-day businesses. They're very broad, they're long-term, they're things that you do in your day-to-day, such as licensing, examination, enforcement. Your objectives, however, are specific to the strategic plan, and they're short-term. They're only, they're like little mini goals, if you can think about it, that are only, you only have them for the length of your strategic plan. So, and they're a lot more specific rather than just licensing. They could be, you know, we want to have more licensing applications in different languages or something like that. That would be an example of an objective. And then I also kind of explained objectives already, but your objectives are based on the current trends and issues and initiatives that are presented in that environmental scan report, because that is what your stakeholders believe is relevant right now for you as an organization and what is important now. And then you can kind of think of your strategic plan as a house. Your mission, values, and vision are the foundation of your organization. The goals are your walls. It kind of brings structure. And then the objectives are like furnishing. It's the curtains. It's the nice chair that you put that you can read in. And that's how you can kind of like visualize it. All right. And then lastly, the how will we get there? That's answered by our action plan, which kind of like I hinted at a little bit earlier. This is where I'll work with staff and the leadership at BBS to evaluate resources, assign responsibility to specific tasks under each of those objectives, establishing timelines and who's going to be responsible for making sure each of those tasks gets done in the time that it needs to be done. And then we'll be measuring progress with performance measures. And we'll have the tracking tool that you can use to do regular check-ins. I hate to brag, but it is a very nice tracker. It's good for both people who like to keep track of that stuff, and it also has a very nice visual component. OMBC recently gave us a bunch of like cheer for it. So if you want to go watch their board meeting where they're talking it up, I highly suggest it. But it looks, it's a very good way to track your progress and like kind of have a nice like presentation at your board meeting. Like, okay, this is, you know, how we're doing on our strategic plan. All right. And that is it. Are there any questions for the strategic planning process?
Thank you. I appreciate your enthusiasm for the process. Do we have any comments or questions from our board? How about any comments or questions from our audience? Any comments or questions from our remote audience?
All right, we are open for public comment via WebEx. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users, dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request, you wish to continue?
Yes, thank you, moderator. Thank you. That was a great presentation. I think you made everything very clear for us.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. She's here. Okay. All right. So next on our agenda is the social work licensure compact presentation. Steve, would you please introduce Caitlin?
Yes, hi. Caitlin Bison will be joining us on virtually to give us a presentation about the Social Work Compact. And Caitlin is a policy analyst for the National Center for Interstate Compacts of the Council of State Governments. This is timely because AB 427 was introduced this year, and that is for the Social Work Compact. So this will give you some more information about that and will help you in our further discussions at further future board meetings. So Caitlin, thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you for having me.
And you can begin. I think we have a slideshow presentation.
Okay. Do you have it or should I share my own?
We have it actually.
Okay. Then yeah, I can get started. Like you said, my name is Caitlin Bison. I'm a policy analyst with the National Center for Interstate Compacts, and I'm just here to give you all, talk about compacts more generally, their history and use by other professions, and then get into more of the specifics of the social work compact. And I'm just gonna give some time for me to see the slides, unless it'd be easier for me to share my own.
This is the moderator. You have control now. Up at the top in the center, you should see a left arrow, a 0, 1, and a right arrow. And that's the best way to control what we're looking at.
Okay. Okay. First screen. Sorry, I'm having a bit of trouble with.
We are also available to change the slides for you. All you have to do is tell us.
Okay, you go ahead and do that.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm not sure why it's not letting me. Okay, yes. So just to kind of introduce the Council of State Governments, we're essentially a nonpartisan organization that serves all three branches of government. Next slide, please. More importantly, within that, we house the National Center for Interstate Compacts. So essentially, we seek to help states work together to solve mutual issues such as licensure portability. And at the National Center for Interstate Compacts, we sort of serve as an informational clearinghouse on interstate compacts, providing technical assistance and training, and are the primary facilitators for assisting states with interstate compacts. Next slide, please. So first I'll just start with, kind of generally what is an interstate compact. Essentially, it's a legal contract between states. So just as two people can enter into, a contractual relationship, so can states. And a driver's license is the most common example of an interstate compact, which is why we have that image up there. So people's ability to hold one driver's license and drive anywhere else in the country is facilitated by an interstate compact. And these compacts for occupational licensure function very similarly to the driver's license compact, where you are maintaining that one license to practice that authorizes you to be able to practice in all other member states. And you can see some of the main points there with allowing states to address shared problems, with maintaining sovereignty over their state laws and responding to national priorities. Next slide, please. So specifically with occupational licensing compacts, over the past decade or so, there's been kind of an explosion of interest in professions using these compacts to facilitate mobility, solve problems of portability, and practicing in multiple states. So like you see there, the goal is to facilitate multi-state practice, maintaining that one license, like I mentioned before, and being able to practice in all the other compact member states without having to go through each state's individual licensing process. There's also the ability of these compacts to maintain or even improve public safety, mostly due to a requirement to share information by the compact. So all of these occupational licensing compacts set up a shared data system between all of the compact member states, where they will have access to available, investigative information on discipline, adverse actions, that kind of thing. So it's really raising the bar for the information that boards have access to protect public health and safety in their states. And it is just kind of an optional pathway that a social worker would be able to take advantage of if they want. So the scope of practice remains untouched by the compact, and the state would be able to maintain control over their single state licensing process. And you can see here, most states have passed at least one of these occupational licensing compacts, and 42 states and DC have passed at least 3. And there are currently 18 professions with active interstate compacts. Next slide, please. So here is that list of compacts, and the number next to it is the number of states that are members. The ones on the, I don't know which way you're facing, but left side of my screen with the higher membership are older. So they've been around for a while. I think the nursing compact has been around since the 90s or something. And then the ones on the right side of your screen are a bit newer. So they've only been through 1 or 2 legislative sessions. And you can see there's kind of a clear outlier here with Social Work Compact already having 22 compact member states. So it is one of our most popular ones, definitely. Next slide, please. So now I just want to talk about some benefits for different groups. Right now, I'll start with some benefits for licensees. So the primary benefit of these compacts is the ease of mobility for licensees, being able to have expanded employment opportunities for social workers who would no longer be limited to practicing in their state of residence. Telehealth is a huge benefit. Over this process, we have heard of some social workers having, 20-something licenses. So you can see the benefit of the compact that allows you to maintain this one license, but still keep practicing and providing telehealth services in other states. Also, all of these compacts are supported by the Department of Defense, who have found that compacts to be the most effective way to lower barriers to licensure for military families who move on average every 2 to 3 years. So the compact can also benefit that group of licensees as well. Next slide. And then here are some benefits for regulators. So usually with these compacts, we see a reduction of application and processing time, just a general overall reduced administrative burden, with the state not having to process as many out-of-state applications. There's also, the compact sets up an ability to conduct joint investigations and work across state lines on the investigation of practitioners using the compacts, which can be a big benefit for regulators. And then the data system that I mentioned before, and just the amount of information sharing that occurs can also be a great benefit. Next slide, please. Then just some general benefits for states. States usually primarily like these compacts as workforce development tools. We hear a lot about access to care issues, especially in rural areas. So this is kind of a solution that states can use to solve some of these workforce shortages. It's not obviously the solution, but it can potentially help a bit. And then we also hear about issues with continuity of care, and that's something that compacts can work to solve as well. Next slide. So these are just some terms that are used throughout the compact that might be helpful to understand a bit better before getting into the specifics of the language of the social work compact. So first, regulated social worker This is essentially trying to fit all of 3 categories of practice. So we have bachelor's, master's, clinical categories all captured in the compact. And this is just the general term that the compact use is regardless of category is regulated social worker. Next is home state. So this is basically any state a part of the compact where the regulated social worker is primarily domiciled. So, it's where they live essentially, as long as that state is a part of the compact. And then a remote state is essentially a compact member state other than their home state. So if my home state is California and Nevada is also a part of the compact, California would be my home state and Nevada would be a remote state to me. Interstate compact license. This is essentially the multi-state license granted by the home state that authorizes practice in all other member states. So if you think back to the driver's license example, holding that one license and being able to drive anywhere, this is a similar thing here. And then with that, we have the multi-state authorization to practice. I'll talk a bit more about that when we get into adverse actions, but essentially it's the authorization granted through the multi-state license to practice in a single remote state. So essentially it's the thing that the remote state has jurisdiction over. Again, we'll kind of get into more details, but like I mentioned before, let's say my home state is California. Nevada is also in the compact. Nevada has the ability to take action against my authorization to practice in Nevada because that's what they have jurisdiction over, not over my multi-state license in California. But we'll get a bit further into that later. And then the Compact Commission is essentially the governing body made up of member states who are responsible for administering the compact on an ongoing basis. So essentially each member state will have one representative from their state licensing authority that gets to have a seat at the table and vote on behalf of their state on the rules and regulations that govern the compact. Next slide, please. So this just gives kind of a very high level view about how the social work compact specifically works. So let's say a social worker wants to practice in other states. In order to be eligible for the compact, they have to hold or be eligible for an active unencumbered license. The or be eligible language just allows for a new graduate to apply for a multi-state license as their very first license. But essentially, if they have that, they would apply for a multi-state license. The home state would receive that application and verify that they meet those eligibility requirements. They would then issue the multi-state license according to the category of licensure that they sought or previously held. So if they had a master category license, they would get that same category multi-state license. That license is issued and they now have the ability to practice in all other member states without any other action necessary. As far as continuing education requirements, they would be required to complete those with the home state, but would not be required to complete those with every other member state. It would only be attached to their home state license. There's also language in the compact that allows for military families to designate a home state regardless of where they end up moving. They can keep that one multi-state license without having to change it every time they move. But it essentially creates, one fee, one set of requirements for social workers to have to complete while still being able to practice in multiple states. Next slide, please. So these are just more specific sections of the compact language. So section 3 talks about state requirements to join. So this is essentially what a state has to do as a bar of regulation and what they already have to have in place before they can join. Essentially, they just have to license one or more categories of social work, we know it's usually a mix between the states. Some maybe only clinical, some have master's, bachelor, any combination is fine. They just wouldn't be able to deregulate social work completely and be able to join the compact. They also have to require that the licensees graduate from an accredited social work program, and they have to require that the applicants pass a qualifying national exam. And for the clinical category, they have to require that they complete supervised clinical practice. For this, there's no hours requirement. So they're eligible just as long as they have the requirement. It doesn't have any specific number attached to it. Next slide, please. Then there are a couple ongoing obligations for states. So they would have to notify the commission of any discipline actions taken against a licensee. Goes along with the setup of the data system. They would have to comply with the rules and regulations of the commission. And they have to implement a background check. This wouldn't say that a state has to have a background check in place right now. It's just saying once they join the compact, they would have to run a background check on anyone that will be using the compact, just kind of a heightened public protection concern since they would be allowed to practice in multiple states. And then, like I mentioned before, they would also have to participate in that shared data system. Next slide, please. This section, section 4, deals with the eligibility requirements for social workers. So they have to complete a number of different competency requirements. So the first is they have to pass a qualifying national exam. They have to, or have a period of continuous licensure for any social workers that were licensed before the exam. So if you were licensed prior to your state adopting the exam and have been continuously licensed, that would also satisfy. And then, or complete a number of substantially equivalent requirements. That just gives the commission flexibility if there were another competency requirement that was accepted by the majority of states, decades into the future. And then they must also have an accredited social work degree. So that's MSW or higher for master's, BSW or higher for bachelor's. And then for clinical categories only, they have to complete 3,000 hours of post-grad clinical practice or 2 years. That number, 3,000 hours or 2 years, was about the uniformly found between states. So the majority of states are at least 3,000 hours or 2 years. Next slide, please. So there are some other requirements for these social workers. They, like I mentioned before, they must hold or be eligible for an active unencumbered license. So any limitation on their license that prohibits them from practicing their full extent of scope of practice, they wouldn't qualify. They have to pay all fees related to the application. The fee for the multi-state license is something that each state sets. We usually see that fee be similar to the fee for a regular license or slightly higher, but it's basically completely up to each state to decide that. And then the continuing education requirement, they have to complete those for their home state. Like I mentioned before, instead of completing continuing education in every state you have you practice in, you would only have to do so for your home state. Since the compact is contingent on you maintaining that home state license, as long as you do, you would still have the ability to practice in other member states. Like I mentioned before, we've heard stories of social workers having 15 or 20 licenses, so you can see the amount of work eliminated around and cost around that would be great. And then they must to agree to abide by the laws and regulations where the client is located. So under the compact, the scope of practice is where the client is located, and this includes telepractice. And if they violate the Practice Act in the state where the client is located, that state can take action against their authorization to practice. But that's something, again, we'll talk about more a bit later. Next slide, please. This is just a quick summary of some other sections of the compact language. Section 5 deals with how to actually administer the application process. Section 6 just emphasizes all of the things that member state licensing boards retain control over, such as their single state licensing process, their scope of practice, etc. Section 7 deals with the scenario if you want to move and change home states. Next slide, please. So I'll just kind of get into a little more detail about that. So let's say that state A is multi-state, or sorry, let's say you want to move from state A to state B. State A's multi-state license would expire and state B would issue that new multi-state license, since under the compact, you can only hold one multi-state license at a time. But to get you that new license in your new home state is a very expedited process. There would likely be another background check, potentially a jurisprudence assessment if the state where you're moving to requires that, but it's without primary source verification. So a fairly seamless process to get you that new multi-state license if you are moving between member states. And then essentially, if you move from a state that's in the compact to a state that is not a member of the compact, you would no longer have access to the compact. Next slide, please. And then another quick summary of some other sections. Section 8 deals with, like I mentioned before, military members and their spouses being able to designate a home state and keep that regardless of where they end up having to move. Section 9 deals with adverse action, so what a remote versus a home state have jurisdiction over. Section 10 deals with the establishment of the Compact Commission. So like I said before, the commissioner will be usually a state licensing board representative or their designee. Usually we see executive directors or legal counsel to the board serve on these commissions. And then Section 11 deals with the data system and just the type of information that the system will collect. And then next slide, please. I'll go back to Section 9 just to kind of go into further detail about that with two scenarios. So scenario 1, let's say a social worker violates the Practice Act in their home state. The home state would conduct an investigation and maybe they decide to take adverse action. That action would then be reported to all other member states through the data system. And their ability to practice in all compact member states would be suspended. Since if you remember before, eligibility for the compact is based on holding an active unencumbered license in your home state. So if that license is encumbered, they wouldn't be able to use the compact anymore until that license is restored to good standing. Next slide, please. So scenario 2, let's say a social worker violates the Practice Act in a remote state. The remote state would then be able to conduct an investigation. And let's say they're conducting the investigation, they would have to report the presence of that investigation to the data system. I wouldn't say anything specifically, just like the presence of that investigation. I think in the nursing compact is just like a flag in their system. The remote state can't take action on the multi-state license itself because they didn't issue that. But since it's reported to the data system, all other member states can see, and they would be able to either ignore or decide to take action against their own authorizations to practice. And then the home state would also be able to review and deem whether they think action is necessary on the multi-state license itself. Next slide, please. So this slide just kind of goes over the Compact Commission. Like I said before, it's comprised of a representative from each member state. And this just shows, what it can and cannot do. Essentially, what it can do are the day-to-day operations of the compact. And what it cannot do is, touch practitioners not seeking to practice via the compact or extend beyond the implementation of the compact. Next slide, please. Another quick summary. Section 12 deals with rulemaking. So just what kind of rules can be passed by the commission. Section 13 deals with dispute resolution. Section 14 deals with the effective date. So this essentially says that the compact is not effective until it's passed in at least 7 states. Social work is already well beyond that, so we're good on that. And it also deals with withdrawal in this section. So a state can withdraw if they choose to do so, just like with a contract as well. Section 15 deals with severability. So again, similar to a contract, all the parties can come together and collectively sever it if they wish to do so. Section 16 deals with if a compact conflicts with state law, it says that the compact would supersede. However, it's very rare for there to be a conflict like this, since it is an optional alternate pathway for a social worker to take that cannot touch anything about single state licensing or scope of practice. So it's usually in terms of like rulemaking procedures, public notice of meetings, stuff like that, not like the core elements of social work practice. Next slide, please. So this just shows where legislation is pending so far. The dark blue is where states that have been enacted, and the light blue is where legislation is pending. That includes California. This map is also a little old, so it should also include Texas and Alaska as well, have filed legislation, and North Carolina. I believe so. We have 19 states with pending legislation for the social work compact so far. Next slide, please. So this is just to give an update on where the social work compact is. So like I mentioned before, we have 22 member states and with pending legislation, and that should be 19 states now. But multi-state licenses are not yet being issued. There's sort of a waiting period for the commission to work to implement this process, usually taking about 12 to 24 months. The commission has met 2 times so far and has been getting together with their establishing committees, but the brunt of the work for them in the beginning will be setting up the data system in order for states to issue those multi-state licenses. Next slide, please. And then this is just the website for the Social Work Compact. We have a bunch of different educational resources. We have the model compact legislation and that compact map where you can see where the legislation is pending. And I am available to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you for the presentation. I just want to remind the board members that this is a Q&A. We're going to have a deeper discussion about this through our Policy and Advocacy Committee meeting coming up, and then again at the board meeting in May. So we're just kind of fact-finding at this point. I do appreciate the presentation. I have it's a broad question. What are the downsides of the compact for, I mean, obviously for California specifically, but for other states? What would be a downside to being part of it?
I would say, it's not immediate. So the commission is going to have to do some beginning work to get this to be set up, but there's not, no precedent for that. Like I said before, there are 18 professions with these interstate compacts, a lot of in differing stages. So they wouldn't be kind of, out in open water, not knowing. They have some precedent about how to get these things started and everything. So definitely a bit of a waiting game. Even if it was passed today, it wouldn't be implemented in, like I said, probably about a year at least.
Thank you. Wendy?
Have a question about the organizational structure. I noticed that each state has one vote on regardless of the proportional number of licensees. And I think we're aware that California has a much larger licensee population than most other states. And so is there consideration for proportional representation to reflect the number of licensees that California would be bringing to the table? It's just a little struggle in my mind to have one vote when we have such a large population.
All I know is that's how all of the other occupational licensing compacts have been set up, is just with one vote per state, just to give each state an equal voice in that. And that's how they've been written historically.
Justin, and then Abigail.
Thank you very much for this presentation. It's very informative. This is being in part sold as a way to address workforce shortages by allowing people to cross state lines or practice in multiple states. What sort of data exists to suggest that this will address workforce shortages?
Yeah, so since a lot of these compacts are in their early stages, there are some beginning studies that have shown this a little bit. One about the IMLC, the medical compact, has a little bit of data showing this. And then there might be one other study as well. But since, a lot of these are new, those studies are just starting to come out now.
Is there any data for social workers specifically?
Social work, since it hasn't been implemented yet, multi-state licenses are not yet being issued. We're still in the very beginning stages of this. It hasn't, but you can kind of see the effects with some of the more established compacts, like the nursing compact that's been around for decades, and the IMLC compact.
So I think I lost the thread. You're saying that there's a little bit of data on the compacts that are newer, but you also said nursing has been around for decades. Is there data to show that nursing workforce changed as a result of this compact?
Yes, I'm sorry. I meant there is some studies coming out on the older compacts, but with a lot of these newer compacts that haven't actually been implemented yet, there can't be studies done because the multi-state licenses aren't yet.
Can you provide those studies to the board?
Yes, I can send those studies over.
Thank you. My second question is that we've had concerns about whether we would lose authority to regulate what sort of topics are on the exams, what CEs are required, what coursework is required. Can you talk a little bit about how much authority California would maintain in overseeing these things?
Yeah, so California would continue to have authority on their single state licensing process. So any, continuing education, that would still be something that social workers in California that wish to get a multi-state license would still have to complete, and California would maintain complete control over that, as well as their scope of practice. So also any social workers coming into California that would be able to practice through the compact would have to follow the laws and regulations of California if they are practicing there.
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. California's authority to regulate coursework, CEs, and state-specific topics would not change?
No, yes. So anyone living in California that gets a multi-state license, they would still have to complete all of the.
That's not my question. Is it? This is multi.
The compact doesn't have any authority to say anything about a state's single state licensing process.
Yeah.
I think it's the authority over the multi-state license. Does California hold the authority over a multi-state licensed person coming in? Can we have requirements that have to be met, such as education, or such as, education? That's our concern, like cultural competency. Could we say you can do a multi-state license in California and practice here, but you need extra courses?
So
Or
yeah,
CE.
if like I mentioned before, so a social worker would only have to complete the CEs in their home state. So if a social worker has a multi-state license in, let's say, Nevada, and that's their home state, and they can use the compact to practice in California, they
Yeah.
wouldn't have to complete any California specific competency requirements and everything. That
Yeah.
would only be for the home state people. Yeah.
So I just want to make sure that I'm understanding this presentation accurately. And thank you for your patience as I navigate that. Am I hearing this correctly, that if I am a social worker, if I'm a clinical social worker in a state that requires no training in working with queer participants, with trans participants, maybe I have training in conversion therapy for youth, and I want to work in California, and I have no experience working with that population, then I'm not required to take any additional coursework, any additional CEs. I'm just sort of brought into the state and deemed ready to practice.
So they would still, the requirements outlined in the compact, they would still have to complete all of the compact requirements. So it's essentially having states accept this uniform set of requirements that says, we'll accept people that complete these uniform set of requirements. As far as, specific jurisprudence assessments, things like that, they would still have to be subject to the scope of practice of California. So they would still have to follow the rules and regulations of California. But as far as, since it does give access to all states, that would mean completing 22 different continuing education requirements every year. And the point of this is to facilitate mobility for social workers.
Yeah, so you made a point multiple times that this, I think the exact wording on the slides was maintains and improves public safety. I'm wondering if you can connect or if you can help me understand how it maintains and improves public safety without having social workers address state-specific issues, training requirements, et cetera.
Yeah, the public safety aspect is due to the shared data system, like I mentioned. So states will just have more access to information and discipline information about anyone practicing in their states. So just that cross-state information sharing, and then as well as it sets up the possibility for joint investigations between member states. So in that way, it can help improve and maintain public safety.
Okay, so we're not improving or maintaining public safety by having higher qualified, higher trained social workers. It's strictly through having multiple states able to target licensing problems.
Like, what do you mean by licensing problems?
Sorry, the public safety is maintained through once someone violates their scope of practice.
So, yes, so if they are disciplined in one state, that information would be shared with all other states, who can choose to whether or not they would like to take action on their own multi-state authorization of practice or on the multi-state license itself.
Great, thank you. And my final question, and thank you for helping me understand this better. This board, multiple boards, but this one in particular, have expressed concerns about ASWB, the exam, and the serious racial disparities in pass rates. Can you talk a little bit more about how this compact is moving towards or away from an exam that disproportionately harms Black and Brown communities?
So there is a requirement in the compact for any social worker wanting to practice under the compact to pass a qualifying national exam. That language does not specifically name the ASWB exam, just so that it can last, decades in the future if something does change, but essentially the only national exam currently is the ASWB exam. And that requirement is in there just because the majority of states do require the national exam. But we do know that some states are moving away from that. And if they choose to do so in their single state licensing process, that is okay. So a state can remove the national exam requirement for their single state licensing process. But it would have to be a requirement of anyone wishing to practice through the compact, which is just an alternate pathway. So if a person in California wants to not practice through the compact and just get a California license, and let's say California gets rid of that requirement or something like that, they wouldn't have to meet that requirement.
And they wouldn't have to meet that requirement is another way of saying that if a state moved away from a national exam with known problems and racial disparities, that state would no longer, you would no longer grant these social workers from that state a multi-state license. Is that right?
Well, it's a requirement of the compact. So if they wish to practice under the compact, they would have to pass the qualifying national exam. Currently, the only one is the ASWB exam. And again, that's just because the majority of states, that is the requirement. And we're trying to create a uniform set of eligibility requirements that can be accepted by the majority of states.
Understood. Thank you very much.
Roseanne?
Hi, Caitlin. One question for you. Our board last year considered the LPCC, the Professional Clinical Counselor Compact, and that particular compact had a clause in it that somebody that was coming from getting licensed here, even if it was not their home state, California could still require them to take the California Law and Ethics exam. And it doesn't appear that this particular compact has that clause in it. We wouldn't be able to require that. What is the reasoning behind that? And is that off the table, or is that something that could be added in the future?
Yeah, so the reason is that the counseling compact is a different model of compact. So it's a compact privilege model where each counselor would have to apply for a compact privilege in each state that they wish to work in. So instead of having a multi-state license and being able to practice in all other member states, they would kind of pick and choose which states they would like to have a compact privilege in. And under that, the state can require them to complete jurisprudence assessments, that kind of thing. In the development process, we have a very lengthy development process of these compacts where we get a lot of stakeholder review, individuals in the profession who give feedback on the drafts and the models and that kind of thing for the compact. We found that the multi-state license better met the needs of social workers who, like I said, a lot of them hold, 20 licenses at a time, complete a lot of telehealth practice. So this model better met their needs.
Thank you.
Abigail?
Hi, this is Abigail. How is the compact funded? Is it members that pay, or is it the state or federal government?
So setting up the compact, it comes from a grant currently through HRSA, but eventually that's only for like kind of the first year or so setting up. Eventually it would be funded from like fee collection or other kind of things that it's very early on in the process, and that's something that the finance committee would kind of have to talk about and decide with budgets and things like that. But they only meet once a year. Besides the data system, there's really not that much cost for them.
Okay. So it seems like it's kind of to be continued.
A
We're
little
not
bit, yes,
sure.
yes.
Okay. And then, so it seems that the issues that are being addressed by the compacts are issues that the state is bringing up. So you guys are addressing issues that the states are saying we need support in? So right now, for example, it's like the workforce shortages, especially in like rural areas. Is that how issues are addressed according to what each state or the delegates agree on? I'm just thinking like also as providers, right? Like is the provider's voice heard inside of the compact as well, which can be sometimes different than what the state's issues are. Like I know right now there's issues around insurances and how they're treating, right, the provider workforce. So is there, whose voice is being heard inside of the compact and what the focus is?
Yeah, so first I will say I just kind of meant that focus. I wouldn't say it's the Compact Commission's focus or anything like that. It's just what we see as a reason for many states to pass this and why this kind of probably has exploded so much in terms of membership. In terms of voices in the Compact Commission, they are essentially made up of representatives from each licensing board in states. Some of them are social workers themselves, but we also have positions for ex officio membership from professional organizations in the room. Specifically, at their last meeting, they designated NASW to be that. So they have a role on the commission as well and representing the voice of social workers there. And then all of the commission meetings are open to the public and have, a moment for public comment. So any social workers can participate in that way. And then every, rule or bylaw that the commission makes will be put on the website with a period for public comment as well for any social workers to make comments.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Abigail. You have the further, John.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It's been very informative. I have actually a couple of questions just about the structure of your organization. Is the National Center for Interstate Compacts a for-profit or a nonprofit organization?
We're a nonprofit organization.
And what are your major funding sources?
Yeah, so specifically the National Center for Interstate Compact is mainly funded by the Department of Defense, who, like I mentioned earlier, view these compacts. It's a great way for licensure portability for military spouses and their families. And then we also have several contracts with professional associations, depending on each profession.
Okay. And then in your awareness, what do you know are the major lobby groups that are focusing on the passage of this social work licensure compact?
I don't know of any specific groups. I would say usually it is NASW chapters in each states that are pushing the compact legislation.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions?
Yeah, I have a question, Chris.
Nick.
Thanks, Caitlin, for being here. Just a couple of questions I actually wanted to follow up with Board Member Huff. Sort of questions regarding some of the requirements for cultural competency and those types of things. And I recognize and understand the structure being a multi-state and this one in particular being a uniform standard. And so I think I'm assuming then that the commission is the one that will be setting these standards. And so my questions are about, has that commission already been established? Have those rules already been set, or are those still in the process of being established?
Yeah, so very early in their establishment, they had their first meeting in September, their second meeting in February, and they're really just starting to form their committees. Finally got a rule on rulemaking, so maybe they can make some more substantial rules more soon. So I would say, yeah, nothing, they're very early on in the process so far.
So should, let's just say hypothetically, California join this compact, it sounds like, I know board member Stack mentioned that there would only be one delegate representing the commission or with part of the commission. And so kind of along similar lines, what ability would California have in setting these rules and regulations that would be required of the compact?
Like I said, it would be an equal voice for each state in terms of one representative from each state. So they would be able to vote on any of the rules and regulations that come through the full commission. And then, we see some states representative choose to join a number of different committees as well, which would be a bit more of a time commitment. So it's really kind of a pick and choose based on each representative and what they wish to do. The minimum, would be attending the full commission yearly to maybe twice a year full commission meetings, and then you could get more involved based on committee meetings and things like that. But everything has to go through the full commission anyway. So it would still be an equal one representative vote for everything that passed through.
And does the commission have the ability to, as part of their standards and rules, be able to set extra or additional requirements as part of the compact above an individual state? For example, cultural competency, whatever that might be, or additional type of training requirements as part of the compact?
So the compact model language cannot be changed because it has to be, like I mentioned, that uniform set of requirements that each state is agreeing to. So they're all, agreeing to the same set of eligibility requirements. In terms of changing those, it would most likely have to be a matter of, repassing legislation. And
I guess, I'm so sorry. I guess maybe I'm a little confused. So the rules and regulations committee, I think you said, is still forming. So within those rules and regulations, can they not set certain standards, such as these are specific rules that we require, like, yes, these are the individual requirements of a state to get licensed, and then here's the requirements of the compact that might include certain cultural competency training, for example?
So the compact already has a set of requirements that was developed, over the course of, like, I think 18 months or something like that, with a period for public comment and all this, to kind of establish these set of requirements that are accepted by the majority of states. So the rules and regulations that they would be dealing with would, likely not be touching that because it would be kind of set in the legislation. It's really going to be about the day-to-day operations of the compact and issuing multi-state licenses.
Okay, so just to make sure I understand, so the rules and regulations committee will be more of an operational rules and regulations, and would it be less to do with less to do with like additional requirements that could be imposed on states joining the compact, correct?
I would say there could be more clarity added, but in terms of changing those, like I said, likely, if for some reason there is flexibility existing in the compact, if there is, like I said, a competency requirement or something that has been accepted by the majority of states because we want this compact to last, for decades in the future. But any, something as substantial as the eligibility requirements, it would likely mean repassing the legislation in every state, a big to-do. Also, like I said, the commission will just be dealing with the day-to-day operations of the compact and adding further clarification in some instances.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Abigail?
I just thought of another question. There's right now a lot of discussion about Medicaid. and telehealth, and potentially requiring therapists to see their patients in person at least once. I think within like 6 months or a year. I know like there's no final answer on that. How will that impact the compact if that were to happen? Because then it would be, right, kind of moot.
I'm not sure. That might be something for the commission to kind of start discussing at one of their meetings. I'm not sure.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you, board, for the robust conversation. Are there any questions from our audience in the room?
How about now? There we go. Good morning, Ben Caldwell, MFT. Yeah. How's that? All right, I'll try that. Can you hear me okay? All right. Ben Caldwell, MFT. Board Member Huft, I am also a bit stuck on the repeated references here to the compact improving public safety. The reality is that, as you were suggesting, this compact goes against the board's public protection mission. As you all know well, there are a number of important areas of law that are state specific. Those include rules around involuntary hospitalization, child, elder, and dependent adult abuse reporting, exceptions to confidentiality, requirements for telehealth, and on and on. But as you've learned, the multi-state license provided by the compact would allow social workers from other jurisdictions to practice on California clients without demanding a single minute of training or accountability for those California-specific rules. How's that? Is that better? Yeah. In addition, as you've heard, the compact would tie the board's hands by requiring your ongoing use of the ASWB clinical exam. You saw in the executive officer's report yesterday that in the last quarter of 2024, the pass rate on that exam was 51%. The problems and disparities with the ASWB exam are well documented, but suffice to say that it's wrong on its face to conclude that essentially half of the social workers taking the test would be unsafe for independent practice. Put those together, and the Social Work Compact forces you to let unprepared people into licensed practice in California, while also tying you to a broken clinical exam that keeps well-prepared people out of licensed practice. That's not protecting public safety. I know you're not voting today, and there will be further discussion.
15 seconds.
When it comes time for the board to take a position on AB 427, I hope you'll oppose. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Any further comments from our participants in the audience? Any comments from our remote participants?
All right, we are open for public comment via WebEx. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise that hand by tapping the hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users, dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few more seconds to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request online, do you wish to continue with the agenda?
Yes, thank you, moderator. Thank you, Caitlin, for that presentation. We truly appreciate it, and for taking all of our questions. We do appreciate that. Also, we are very curious as to see how California will be, whether this would be a positive thing for our state or not. So we appreciate all of the hard work that you put in and the information that you provided. With that, we'll take a break. So let's reconvene in 10 minutes. All right, welcome back. We're going to move to item number 22 on the agenda, the overview and discussion of the board's fund conditions. Steve, would you please provide us with an overview?
Yes, we'll be talking about our current fund balance reserve, and what we might need to do in the near future. So give you a little bit of background. In 2018, the board contracted with an outside consultant, CPS HR Consulting, to conduct a review of its fee structure and staff workload. The purpose of the study was to determine whether the board's current fee levels were appropriate for covering costs of the board's operations. The review focused on 25 fees that represented approximately 90% of the board's revenue, including registration applications, licensing applications, exam applications, and renewals. And the analysis eventually revealed that while the board's revenue had increased 39% over the past 4 years, its expenditures had risen by 42%, creating a structural imbalance. The imbalance was mainly due to rising operational costs, including staffing expenses and attorney general fees. Additionally, it was noted that the board had not raised its fees for most of the license types for over 20 years. So to correct this and to figure out what we should be charging, CPS used 3 years of expenditure data from fiscal year 16-17 to fiscal year 18-19 to calculate a fully absorbed cost rate of $120 per hour, which equaled about $2 per minute. And these estimates were used to propose a new fee structure which was going to project a 5-month reserve by the end of 23-24 fiscal year. When proposing the fee structure, the board did consider the financial impact that this would have on registrants and adjusted the fees to ensure that the new cost structure was equitable for both registrants and licensees. That's because registrants typically earn less than licensees, so we wanted to make sure it didn't impact them as much. So in 2020, the board sponsored AB 2142, which proposed fee increases, but this was eventually folded into another bill. It's AB 3330, and there was a broader bill that raised license, registration, and exam fees for several other DCA boards at the time. And this bill was signed into law in the statutes of 2020. And so we began charging the new fees in 2021. So a fund balance, just to make sure, I know we've talked about it before, but a fund balance is the surplus amount of money left at the end of the fiscal year, which then carries over to the next year. However, under current law, a reserve that exceeds 24 months of operating expenses is not permissible, or we need to actually take action on that if it's more than 24 months. And that is in California Business and Profession Code 128.5. With the current fee structure, the board is projected to exceed the 24-month limit, reaching a reserve of 25.7, it's estimated, by the end of fiscal year 24-25. And as a result, the board must take action at this time to reduce the reserve and bring it back closer to this statutory limit. So the current efforts that we have done, with us today, we have Matt Nishimi and Sam Dyer from the budget crew. Just like say budget crew, if that's okay. Thank you for coming here. We've been having discussions, and they did some actually projections for us to look at some options or some fee reductions we could do. So an initial review revealed that CPS had underestimated our application volumes by 31%, which definitely skewed our revenue projections. In the light of this, the budget team has given us 2 options, and it's an initial 2 options possibly. We can actually, after this meeting, go back and look some more. We will be bringing this back at a future meeting, definitely in May. So the 2 options, the 2 scenarios that we have would be a 24-month reduction in fees, which would bring the reserve fund down to 21.5 months by the end of fiscal year 27-28. Scenario 2 is a 48-month reduction in fees, which would lower the reserve fund to 17.5 months by the end of fiscal year 29-30. Both scenarios propose a 50% reduction in fees, including initial applications, license renewals. And yeah, so those are two options. And that's kind of give you an idea of what we might be looking at. We will definitely have further to work with Matt, and we've been working with Matt to look at further, projections to see if there's anything that we basically coming up with a plan to present to you in May to vote on. This would require a regulatory packet, and so that's luckily it's been looked at, and it does. We will not have to. It looks like not have to do any amendments to our statutory minimums and maximums. Currently, right now, all our fees that we have in place are at our statutory minimum. So what I think the plan forward is once we propose what regulation we want to move forward with in our May meeting, then I think the goal is to definitely bring down those reserve funds while ensuring that we do have enough reserve in the future to for those emergency situations, or if we need additional staff members or resources. So, Matt, and would you like to add something or?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Sodergren. My name is Matt Nishamini. I'm with the DCA Budget Office. So just to clarify, we would have to take some sort of statutory action. Currently, the BNP code 128.5 isn't super clear on what pathway we would take to actually reduce fees below the current statutory minimums. So one option would be to lower the statutory minimums or to seek some other type of language that would allow us to temporarily reduce below the statutory minimums.
My understanding, I think, was of what we were doing regulations, the actual regulation says notwithstanding any other provisions in the laws. We were thinking that we could actually, that does preclude us from having to do any statutory amendments, and we have some legal opinion behind you. So thank you, Matt.
I'm not going to cause any problems with my voice on this microphone, but if you look at Business and Professions Code Section 128.5, it grants the authority to this board to reduce fees notwithstanding any other provision of law. So I think legal counsel believes that supersedes the statutory minimum and maximum language that's in their act. And it says regardless of whether it's granted in statute or set by the board itself. So if you look at the language, it seems to me, and board counsel agrees, that we don't need to go back and revise the board's Practice Act, but we could simply adopt regulations that could temporarily reduce the fees for a period of time and then revert back to the fees that were in effect when the minimums were enacted. So that's our legal opinion. Of course, if we file it and OAL says something differently, then we can always come back and seek statutory amendments. But I think it's worth a shot at doing regulations based on my read of Business and Professions Code Section 128.5.
So our office defers to legal.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, we haven't had that discussion since then. It was a recent discussion. So thank you for bringing that up, though. I appreciate that, Matt.
You bet.
And that's, regulation definitely, if we had to do statutory, then we'd have to go through the statutory process. And then once we had the bill passed or the legislation passed, then we would have to do regulatory. So I think this puts us up in a possibility to have a more, I don't want to say this, but expeditious way to actually make these changes, which is good.
So I would just add, doing regulations is something that we do a lot of packages. We do 4 to 6 packages a year for the DCA program. So we have a system in place to expedite these packages. We work very well with staff on regulations typically. So we would have no concerns moving this forward.
Thank you. And any questions?
Mr. Chair, I guess I just have some questions about sort of the potential scenarios. I know we had in there like a 50% cut and the 25% cut or things like that. given that we still have an outstanding loan to the general fund, does this recommendation include that calculations of that money returning as part of the recommendation, or would that money be on top of what's already being projected?
Yes, thank you for the question. So there is a fund condition statement. We actually have 3 fund condition statements in the package. And we have it grayed out right here in the second column. So the 10 million, there's a minus 10 million, that's showing the loan going out to the general fund. And then we penciled in gray, the 10 million coming back.
Okay,
We
thank you.
didn't add the interest because we don't know if it's going to be,
You don't know when it's going to
we
come
don't know
back.
when it's coming back.
Right.
But we do score it against the reserve balance. So it does count against the reserve balance.
Okay, and then I guess, I know it's coming back, but while I am absolutely in favor of providing some reductions in fees, I guess I want to kind of navigate through the end of that process where it'll feel like a dramatic increase in fees, where you're going to have people that get used to a lower level of fees. And then suddenly the next time they renew, it's going to be a lot bigger. So I just kind of want to make sure we navigate through that carefully, whether there's a way to kind of phase in and phase out a little more slowly to not have that sticker shock at the end of the process.
Oh, yeah. And I think definitely before, whatever regulations we put in place, if there's, like we've proposed here, there's going to be an end time, but before that time, we would actually have another review to see what's going on. And I mean, whether, the fees are current, and then we could possibly look towards making lower fees or keep them consistent or seeing where we're at that time. So.
Yeah, I guess I'm just looking for not a dramatic
sudden, yeah.
return to the previous fee.
Okay.
From, double, essentially at that, if we do a 50% cut
step
now,
increase.
when it's over, we'll be doubling fees.
Okay.
So I just
okay.
want to be sensitive to that.
So the reduction in fees is just one component of this proposal and what you need to consider. Future expenditures, future growths, future cost pressures to the board, right? So your costs could go up in the future, and they likely will. So that's something to consider. The other thing to consider is the biennial renewal cycle. So under this proposal, we've done a 24-month cycle to cover the licensees fairly, and then we've done a 48. And so just something to consider as you move forward. And then just lastly, so we would, as Mr. Sodergren said, you would be considering future regulatory increases. And so you could step those. You have the purview to adjust the fees in the future.
Thank you. I just want to make sure we have our exit path clear when we start the entrance into the process as well.
Yeah, thank you for this. Is the mechanism of fee reduction always the same? Is it always just reduce the fees, or is it ever keep the fees the same and offer waivers? And I'm wondering if that changes, any of the financial impact.
So our office typically works with fee reductions. In this model, it's most all of the fees, but you could specifically target certain fees, maybe the entry level to reduce barriers to entry. That's, again, a policy decision that the board can make. As far as waivers, and I would again defer to legal, but it would likely have to have some sort of authority to grant that waiver.
Yeah, I thank you for identifying targeting specific fees, because I do wonder if, as licensees gain upward mobility, if the path to licensure is hindered most at the lowest level of fees, or at the earliest fees they would encounter, in which case those fees should be targeted more so than latter
I
fees.
see what you're saying. Okay. Well, and we'll be bringing this back and to have that discussion to see what we can kind of propose, and then we can craft it from there to, yeah.
Christy Shields, Regulations Council again. So referring back to the statute that we would be using to implement this reduction, 128.5 only supersedes, give the board superseding authority to reduce licensing or other fees. So I think we're limited to fee reduction by that statute. That would be something you might want to think about for another statutory change in the future if that's something you wanted to pursue. In addition, I wanted to let you know that Ms. Helms had done some research, and apparently the board has done this in the past. In 2001 and 2002, there was a fee reduction to address this similar issue, and that's how the board was able to comply at that time. So we do have a model and a history that we can follow to make sure that your concerns are addressed.
Thank you.
Do you happen to know if the 2001, 2002 fee reduction was sort of a global fee reduction, or were certain fees disproportionately reduced?
I don't
I believe it looks like it was, I'm looking at the order of adoption from
I
that
think it was
time.
pretty across the board.
Renewal fees for all
I can answer that.
practitioners.
It was renewal fees. I wasn't cashiering at the time.
Oh.
Okay. Thank you to the whole team. That info.
Village.
John.
This is one mechanism. Are any other mechanisms being explored or proposed at this time?
Well, like Christy was saying, we need the authority that we have rests in that the section 128. So like the waiver, we don't really have authority to do any types of waiver as a board. So
I'm talking about fee reduction as being presented as one mechanism. Are there other mechanisms we're considering to take care of this surplus that's coming up?
oh, I mean, we're always
More
con-
money?
yeah, no, we're always considering the needs of staff and such, and looking at doing budget change proposals to, to actually that would have an impact on our reserve fund, and that's yeah, I mean, we're always seeking that. So
Because as it's getting better and better, it's exciting to see the application process times coming down. And is that another place to be putting in more staff to reduce, to create spaces
oh yeah,
where your stakeholders are like, yes, my approval came through in 17 days. That's amazing. So that's also has an effect on your stakeholders and is another way to reduce budget.
yeah, no, definitely. Not unfortunately, but the process is it can be very, it's not a guarantee. Even if we ask to actually get positions, we have one currently that has gone up and it will be in the budget. So, but it's not a guarantee, but definitely that does help with that. And I think what I'm looking at in that case too, though, is making a consideration when we're looking at the reductions that we don't reduce it so much where we're left with maybe 3 months, or, I want to make sure that we will have that ability to, make those budget change proposals and possibly use that reserve fund. That's the one thing we're keeping.
And then
an eye
also
on.
really stepping into this idea of where these reductions come, maybe look at as part of our access, our barriers to licensure process, look in that part and understand like, okay, is it the initial fee? Is it when I hit my L&E? Is it when I hit my clinical exam? Are those the places that would have more impact on barriers to licensure that we could direct those specifically there and really look at it, not just an across the board, but with the thoughtful processes, like when people hit that clinical exam, they have no money left in their bank, they've been working for a nonprofit for years. Is that a place where it would be really help to reduce a barrier to licensure? So look at it, really look at it specifically rather than blanket.
Okay, definitely.
Thank you, John. Eleanor?
No, I'm actually kind of excited to see this happen because I feel like it, being from the Central Valley, there's a lot of poverty and a lot of people who are first generation students or even making their way to become clinicians. So even a little bit of money, or for them, it could be a lot of money because, we're talking about $120 an hour. Some of the people are making $15 an hour. So that might take 15 hours to just pay something. So I think that's good. And I think especially for entry level people, I think that's another area to kind of focus on to help increase the amount of people applying.
Thank you. Annette?
Thank you. I think hopefully I'm not getting ahead of the conversation, but why not? So I'm wondering if being in compliance would allow us to future date the effective date. If what we need to do right now with the timeline is to correct what our budget requirement is, the 22 versus the 20, where we are right now, we're exceeding it, our reserve. So if we make the decision now, whether we choose Plan A or Plan B, 1 or 2, as you have it here, I guess I'm wondering, can we take the action now for the future and have it be implemented on whatever effective date that is?
Well, we want to bring back the actual language so we can have you look at what it, I mean, I think what we'll do is from the conversations here, we'll go back and meet with budgets and then take into consideration, looking at currently right now, what we're looking at is proposal for some of the initial application fees and the renewal fees, but maybe we look at other fees such as, and then have that to vote on.
And I think why I'm asking that question, because I'm taking into consideration those folks that what we call grandfathered in, that may have been those fees, raising of those fees may have been applicable, that caused the increase of our reserve. We want to be sensitive to that. But if we future date and look at when the change would be effective, then we could possibly look at bringing whatever changes we take action to or create to folks that are not even in the pipeline yet. It could be, application fees for taking place in 2028 or something like that.
Well, so the design for, not the design, but the language would have a start date and possibly an end date. I mean, it would kind of lay that out. Did you want to add something?
Right, so normally when we do fee reductions, we put in the language when.
I can't hear you.
Sorry.
She was great the other.
Okay, so.
Oh, that's awkward.
So the fee reductions are usually, we put in the regulation, the timing. Okay.
Difficult. Sorry about that.
Okay, so usually we put in the express language, the timing of when something becomes effective and when it ends. So beginning this date, the fee is this until this time. And then once that time frame, then it reverts to the original fees that were adopted by the board. That's usually how we write it. But of course, we're going to need to consult with the budget office to make sure we correctly time it, because you are legally responsible for the budget. Whether it goes over or under, it's your responsibility. So you don't want to overshoot to the point where you're actually running out of money. So it's important to work very closely with the budget office. It's very difficult to get an effective on filing for fees. So it's not usually recommended, but we usually do, like I said, try to put in timeframes for when the switch turns on and off for the reduction and then the return to the typical fee that's set in regulation.
I'm excited to hear your response because that truly answers my question.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Matt, do you have more?
Well, I just wanted to say, we really appreciate all these comments and questions. These are the type of things you need to really be thinking about as it is your responsibility it's your fiduciary responsibility to take care of this board. There are other, it is complicated. These are kind of a problem that people like to have. It's actually, you have too much money in the bank and we're reducing it, but you need to figure out what level of reserve balance you're comfortable with, right? As you move into the future, as you have other priorities and you want to do things as a board, other initiatives, what level of future spending you might want to undertake and seek additional resources. So all of these questions add to this. And then at the same time, we're going through budget cuts right now in the current year and in the budget year, which haven't been fully settled. We're still working through those. So we're going to have a lot more information certainly by the next board meeting.
Thank you. Any other further questions, Justin?
What do you happen to know what other similarly sized boards reserves look like in terms of length of months?
So I would caution comparing yourselves to other boards, only because everyone is so different. And it's really apples and oranges. The size of the board, there isn't another healing arts board exactly like this size. Enforcement costs, it depends on your licensees. We have a large healing arts program that has an enforcement budget of 55%, which is much less than yours. So we have to be careful with that. Also, most of the programs are subject to this this provision, this BNP 128.5 with a 24-month cap. Some have a 10-month cap, or even a 3 to 6 month range, which is really tough. I would say this, that 10, 15 years ago, we would have said a 3 to 6 month reserve balance was sufficient, but that has changed. Now it's really more like 10 to 14 months. Because there are so many unknown, unanticipated costs that come down the pipe. Plus, we know that future costs are always going to increase.
In a bad scenario, if we did run out of money, what happens?
I'm on the docket.
So
Aren't I responsible for paying?
we likely would not allow that to happen. As the control agency, the Department of Finance would curtail operations to reduce your spending so that you maintain solvency. And so that's right, a greater conversation, and it's a mix of policy and operations for you board members to consider as you're looking out on a 10-year horizon and where you want to take this board and what the needs are of this board. But it likely would not happen. But I have seen where programs have had to either triage workload or prioritize workload or actually curtail workload.
Excellent, thank you. And Steve has talked before about wanting to hire more staff and how that is a lengthy process. I wonder if we are even in a position, we're not making a clear decision now, but like if we make a decision on this without also keeping in mind what sounds like a quite lengthy process to get new staff approved, I worry that those are not going to line up. Can you help us understand, like, what is the average timeline of getting new staff approved or new expenditures?
It's not necessarily getting staff approved, it's getting approval from legislature and actually, asking for it. I'm keeping that in mind, and I think some of the projections we have with that, looking at trying to maintain a reserve fund of 10 to 14 months, I think would still allow us, to be able to, I don't want to word the pivot, but maybe seek those additional resources. And so that is definitely something that's keeping in my mind. Like I said, I don't, getting down to a 3 months reserve would kind of restrict us for asking for additional staff. I think it wouldn't make but that's definitely something that's on the top of my mind for future.
How much of it, to what extent do these expected expenditures include the hopeful staff that you're wanting to add? The staff you're hopeful in adding?
Right, this is the current status quo based on
how few people are at it.
On the 25-26 governor's budget. So you're
adding one
currently scheduled to receive an additional position beginning July 1. And so that's what this is pegged off of.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. So the bottom line, Justin, that means there's no BBS cardigans coming for us. So be careful about that.
Board race.
All right. Do you have any comments from our audience members?
Hello, my name is Shanti Ezrin. I'm with CAMFT. Really appreciate the report out on the funding condition today, and definitely appreciate the scenarios that were presented, at least in concept, that would. Oh, yes. Sorry about that. How's this? Okay. Okay, yeah, appreciating the scenarios presented that would reduce and make adjustments to the fee structure. So of course, no concerns or objections there. One thing that I will note when looking at the meeting materials for this. I think attachment A, the way that the current fee column and the proposed fee column is listed, I think that is listed incorrect, where I see the current fee is cheaper and the proposed fees are more expensive. So I think maybe those two were flipped. So I just want to make sure that that is my correct understanding. And then the last thing that I just want to hit on, and I think this was touched in the presentation already, is really just to make sure that the reserve fund going forward after any adjustments to the fee structure still accounts for future staffing workload like discussed and any expenses to get the work done. And to board member Sovik's point on enhancing processing times, just as one example of many. And that's it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any further comments from our audience, present audience? Any comments from our remote participants?
WebEx is now open for public comment on item 22. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise your hand. We will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no comments from the online crowd, do you wish to continue with the agenda?
Yes, thank you, moderator. All right, at this point, we've hit it's almost lunchtime break. So let's reconvene. It's 11:36. Let's get back at 12:40. Thank you. And yes, thank you for your presentation. Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. Hope you enjoyed your lunch. Next on the agenda is the discussion and consideration of the telehealth regulations, comments, and possible adoption of amendments. Christy, would you please provide us with an overview?
Yes. Let me make sure I've got the right item pulled up. Okay, here we go. Thank you. So at the February 2024 meeting, the board approved regulatory changes pertaining to telehealth. And we did notice that those changes to the public, that comment period ended back in November, began in November and ended December 16th. And we did receive several comments, which have been summarized in the memo and provided in their entirety in the attachments. And so the process when we receive comments on a regulation is that we bring them to the board with proposed responses to those comments. It becomes part of the regulation package. We have to show that the board does have to vote as to whether or not they approve our recommended responses. And so the first comment we received was from the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists. And there's several comments within one letter. So we're going to address them separately because they're on separate portions of the regulations. So the first comment was regarding to telehealth as it applies to applicants pending associate registration. So these are people who have applied for an associate registration but have not yet been issued. So CAMT stated that the current and proposed text in that section does not include language that specifies the practice via telehealth for applicants pending associate registration. While the BBS does not directly regulate new graduates, the Business and Professions Code does set forth certain provisions that count supervised hours gained during that window of time between the degree award date and the issue date of the registration. Absent of language, it can be interpreted that postgraduate applicants pending associate registration cannot provide telehealth or that these regulations do not apply to them. CAMT proposes the BBS to consider including reference to the Business and Professions Code 4980-43B for applicants for registration and for all of the different registration types. So the staff is proposing that we do reject the comment and decline to make any changes. And here's why. The proposed regulations are interpreting the Business and Professions Code section 2290.5, which is the law that applies to all healthcare providers providing telehealth services, as defined in that section, and sets those standards for the board's authority to regulate telehealth. So included in that section is the definition of healthcare provider, and that's subsection A3. And that definition states that there are licensees of the board, associate marriage and family therapists, all the different types of associates. And then including marriage and family therapy trainees and associate professional clinical health counselor, clinical counselor trainees. So there is no mention of the authority to regulate applicants who are pending an associate registration in that section. So as a result, the board does not have the authority to extend its telehealth regulations to anyone other than a healthcare provider as defined in that section. The next comment is telehealth as it applies to the 30-day temporary practice allowance. So the CAMP states that the proposed language specifies that to practice via telehealth with the client in California, a current and active California license or registration is required. This language does not address therapists in another U.S. jurisdiction providing services to California under the temporary practice allowance per Business and Professions Code 4980.11. To ensure adherence to these regulatory requirements, CAMP proposes BBS consider adding an exception for therapists providing services to clients in California under the temporary practice allowance. We are proposing to reject this comment and decline to make any changes. And the reason is because the statute that allows the temporary practice allowance, which is the BPC section 4980.11, provides the authority for the temporary practice allowance, which is not to exceed 30 consecutive days in any calendar year, to be issued if the applicant meets certain conditions as specified. But it also states that a person providing services pursuant to the temporary practice allowance is deemed to have agreed to practicing under the jurisdiction of the board and to be bound by the laws of this state, which in this case would include Business and Professions Code section 2290.5. So therefore, adding any additional language to the regulation is not necessary to authorize this practice, as it is already authorized under the Temporary Practice Act allowance. The third comment, it has to do with defining the terms technology, method, and equipment. So CAMP proposed replacing the phrase communication medium with language that instead specifies the technology, method, and equipment used to provide services via telehealth. They feel that it's unclear what is meant by the added terms technology, method, and equipment, and would likely require further guidance from the BBS to help practitioners navigate different telehealth scenarios. They requested the board to consider clarifying these terms and ensure they appropriately reflect language used in the cited state and federal security laws and regulations. So we recommend that we accept this comment and making some changes to the language, and that would involve striking the words technology, method, and equipment, and instead using the words to comply with all applicable federal and state privacy, confidentiality, and security laws governing the use and disclosure of a client's medical information or protected health information. So specific examples, including definitions, have been added to the language to provide the clarification. And we've put them here and also in attachment A, but within the memo here, they're highlighted for a little bit of easier review. So you can see under that paragraph 3, how we have worked in that change here. And then also kind of made some clarifying changes in the language in those the following paragraphs. So we believe these amendments fulfill CAMP's request to ensure the language aligns with established law and provides clear guidance to practitioners. A similar approach to it, identifying the types of information required to be protected and the applicable HIPAA laws and regulations, has been recently adopted by another healing arts board, that's the Dental Hygiene Board of California. So we had, fortunately, some, a little bit of a template that helped us with that language. The fourth comment from CAMP had to do with complying with federal and state laws and regulations. So they stated that the proposed language specifies that the technology, method, and equipment used to provide services via telehealth comply with all applicable federal, state privacy, confidentiality, and security laws and regulations. They stated that it is unclear if the cited laws and regulations are to be applicable to an individual provider's practice or to all clinicians generally. CAMP requests the BBS consider clarifying how specific the cited laws and regulations will apply to practitioners in different work settings. So the board, our recommended response is that we accept this comment with regards to the clarity issues regarding technology, method, and equipment used to provide services via telehealth comply with all applicable federal, state privacy, confidentiality, security laws and regulations. So the board proposes to make changes to the text in regard to this comment as we talked about in the prior section, as noted. However, the board notes that it licenses and registers individual licensees and registrants. We don't regulate businesses. So the board's regulations pertain to all of its licensees and registrants generally, regardless of work setting, except as specified, not except. So regardless of work setting as specified in existing subsection A of this regulation. And the applicable laws cited in the board's proposal already set forth the minimum standards for licensees and registrants to comply with those laws. So as a result, the board believes that its current regulatory text is relatively straightforward in that regard and declines to make any further changes to clarify how specific the cited laws and regulations will apply to practitioners in different work settings. We received a comment from Lisa Larimer-Burtis. This commenter endorsed the proposed changes and stated that it's a benefit to and reflects positively on the profession to promote gender neutral and consistent language. Then they thanked the board for their efforts. So we propose acknowledging the commenter's support and obviously making no changes to the text based upon the comment. The next comment is similar from Mr. An Nguyen. Received during the comment period. They expressed support for changing the language from valid and current to active and current so that patients and providers know that the provider's license is current and that the provider can actively provide services. Keeping valid may bring a loophole where providers say that their license is valid but not mention if it's current or expired, and the commenter thanked the board for their efforts. So again, we acknowledge the support and no changes are made to the text based on the comment. So if the board agrees with the recommended responses and the modified text as set forth in attachment A, we do have a recommended motion that's there in the memo. So I will leave it there.
Any questions or comments from our board members? Thank you for all the work, Christine. Everyone's clear? Do we have a motion? I'll motion to approve the proposed responses to public comments received as set forth in the meeting materials, approve the proposed modified regulation text for sections 1815.5 as set forth in attachment A, and initiate a 15-day public comment period. No relevant adverse comments are received during the public comment period. Authorize the executive officer to make any non-substantive changes to the package and take all steps necessary to complete the rulemaking and adopt the proposed regulations at section 1815.5 as noticed.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Now, this is important stuff. It's good. We the remnants of the telehealth committee. Oh, good. All right. Comments from our audience? Yeah. You can have that seat.
Okay. Hello, Shanti Ezrin with CAMPT. Christy, thank you so much for all of your work, and also to staff for your work as well on the proposed telehealth regulations. And just kind of want to hit on each one of the 4 comments really quickly, and I have a question at the end here. So starting off with some of the ones where there were proposed changes for. So thank you again. Really appreciate your responses and the proposed changes to, I believe they're comments 3 and 4. So adding the examples and definitions to which applicable federal and state laws and regulations apply. That's great. And thank you for considering those comments and making that clear. As for the 2 other comments, I'll start with the one on how these regulations apply to the 30-day temporary practice allowance. No issue or concerns on our side. Really appreciate your response and highlighting that such practice is already authorized under Business and Professions Code, where you cited is great. The only question that we do have is regarding that first comment on how these regulations apply to applicants pending associate registration. Appreciate you going through the rationale there in your response. And while we do understand that the board doesn't have that authority to extend its regulations to anyone outside of who's included in Business and Professions Code, I believe the section 2290.5, postgraduate applicants are currently permitted to provide telehealth services while they wait for their registrations to be issued. So I guess with that understanding, still like to ask how the board sees telehealth applying to the 90-day postgraduate applicants who haven't yet received their registration numbers, and also at the same time just confirm our
15 seconds.
understanding that there's no change regarding those applicants providing telehealth services despite not being included in the regulations. And that's it. Thank you.
Trainees and 90-day rule applicants are kind of a gray area. Technically, the board does not regulate them directly. So if we were to receive a complaint, we would not necessarily be able to take any disciplinary action. And so where it kind of stands with that is, it's like I said, it's kind of a gray area. We would obviously recommend that they follow that. Christy, did you want to weigh in?
Oh, there we go. So, I mean, we'd also look at, anyone that's supervising them and their involvement. That would be kind of our jurisdiction, I think, and with respect to how telehealth should be practiced. And since they would have to follow this rule, you would assume the supervisor would, be supervising in accordance with the board's regulations. And so that's what we would expect to be done in that scenario, unless staff have a different perspective.
Right. The supervisor, they're basically acting under the supervisor's license. So they have ultimate responsibility there for their trainees or their 90-day rule applicant. But we can't necessarily write them into a statute that they have to follow what's in regulations when we don't register or license them.
Great. Definitely understood. I think that helps a lot. Thank you.
And can I ask a clarifying question? If at some point the trainees and 90-day people fall under our jurisdiction, would they get looped into the?
They would, but the only way to make them under our jurisdiction is if we were to register or license them. And so that's kind of another can of worms, which I believe we are going to be exploring in some form for the trainees, but the cost and fees and those kind of things then come into play.
Yeah, I know that we've talked about it in the past, so I'm just curious if they fall under our umbrella, then they would be lumped into this with everybody else.
If they fell into our umbrella and we issued them a physical license or registration, they would be considered quote unquote under the BMP code licensed by the BBS, and then they would fall directly under our jurisdiction. When they're not, they're just sort of practicing under the auspice of their school, of their supervisor. They're not formally regulated. And that's always kind of been one of the board's concerns with the 90-day rule and allowing that. So we've always kind of had to weigh, that continuity of care versus public protection for that short period of time. And so.
Good, thank you. All right, John?
And if I could add to what Roseanne was saying, currently, every other rule and regulation in that space is hopefully being encouraged by supervision and by teaching. So this is just one more piece of that. If we take the idea that we have to regulate them, then we have not been regulating every other thing that they've been doing. So I think there's already a model that says this is being watched by supervisors and by the training systems.
Yeah, I would agree with that. This is kind of one more thing where having the supervisor watch over is what needs to be happening.
All right, thank you. Any other comments from our audience members? All right, how about from our remote participants?
We are open for public comment via WebEx. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment via WebEx, do you wish to continue with the agenda?
Yes, thank you, moderator. Without any further comments, then we can take a vote. Oh, Christina, are you doing the vote?
That'll be Christina.
Okay.
Actually, let me get this down here. Okay. Annette Walker
Yes.
and Eleanor Uribe,
Yes.
Susan Friedman,
Yes.
John Sovek,
Yes.
Wendy Strack,
Yes.
Christopher Jones,
Yes.
Justin Huft,
Yes.
Abigail Ortega.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Excellent. Thank you. Next on the agenda is the discussion and possible action to reconsider previously approved text and to consider initiation of a rulemaking to amend continuing education regulations. Christy, please give us the overview.
Thank you. So at the September 2024 meeting, the board approved proceeding with amendments to the above listed sections of the California Code of Regulations, including 2 forms that are incorporated by reference into the regulation. So as we were preparing the rulemaking file for review, it was discovered that some further language changes are necessary to specify the board's requirements for renewal of a license or registration. And the reason that I know this topic is continuing education, but continuing education is tied to renewal. So some of these regulation sections have mention of renewal, and it was discovered that there's nothing in our regulations that lay out what somebody needs to do in full to renew. You know, they have to submit an application, and there's certain pieces of that that we had to add in there, or it risked being rejected by the Office of Administrative Law. They've been starting to require more detail than in the past. So basically, we had to further specify what our current processes are for renewal. And then also there's some pieces you'll see in there about notice of eligibility for taking the California Law and Ethics exam administered by the board, because that is also mentioned in a section of regulations. So we had to sort of lay out that process between those requirements between the board, the applicant, and the exam vendor, and showing proof of participation, because as it is right now, a registrant has to participate in the exam to renew if they have not yet passed the exam. And then we added a cross-reference in one of the sections that talked about who a registrant can take their CE from. And then there's just a few technical edits and modifying a statutory reference. So the language is in, the amended language is in attachment A. And with the yellow highlighted sections being the new language. I've highlighted the major changes, not like the really tiny changes. So we have 2 recommended motions here. And Christy, was there something we wanted to? We were going to go with motion B, I think, because we had a minor. There was an.
Okay, so it would be motion A because
It would be.
we've revised we fixed all the errors that we caught previously.
We did. I think you found like an underlining, but we can fix that later, right?
Yeah, I mean, so there was
That's
some
what it's on.
stray underline that was missing from a note in one of the sections, but that's
We can
non-substantive.
fix that
So
later, yes.
we can correct that later. So I'm fine with moving motion option A if you agree with these recommended revisions. I apologize for not catching these earlier, but when I was going through the rulemaking file, I realized that the renewal only talked about the certification of continuing education, but that's not the only thing you require to renew a license. And so as I dug into that, I found more things that needed to be specified and made clearer. And so that's why you have this additional detail. So one of the big parts of it is the notice of eligibility process you have with Pearson VUE, which is your exam administrator. And so we put that in the regulations. What does someone need to get to know that they're eligible to take your exam from your vendor? So any questions, please let us know.
Any questions from the board? John?
So I noticed you called out Pearson VUE specifically. Is that detail accurate, or should be an exam vendor in case we switch contracts in a year or two?
So with regulations, we have to say exactly what we're doing at the moment. And so when that happens, we'll have to go through and change the regulation to update it. We didn't used to have to 20 years ago, but that's where the Office of Administrative Law is going with all the new examination regulations I'm seeing. So I'm trying to get ahead of that so you don't have the same problems my other clients did, where they had to go back and put in, for instance, PSI, which is a vendor that a lot of other boards use, to specify who the exam vendor is and what their specific process is for eligibility notice. So I got to read your Pearson VUE contract to figure that out. It was unfun, but I think it worth it in the long run because it's going to provide greater notice and detail to everyone, including your staff, about what is required.
Could you clarify too, if we do need to change it at some point, would that be a section 100 change?
Probably not, unless they have the same exact processes. I mean, it would just depend on what your contract looks like, and I don't know what that's going to look like. So
Gotcha.
hard to say at this
Oh,
point.
okay. Section 100, just for people who aren't aware, it's another regulation process, but it's for a change that doesn't really change anything substantive in the law. So
It doesn't change anyone's duties, rights, or responsibilities. It's just updating things like repealing regulations for which there's no longer a statute to support it, or changing the board's address, or grammatical errors, or renumbering, that kind of thing.
and it's much faster.
Yeah, it's very quick, but it's limited to truly those things that don't change the responsibilities of the applicants. And I don't know, changing vendors kind of usually a big thing and has majorly substantive changes in process, but it could be, but I doubt it. We'll see.
Any other questions? Comments? Thank you, Christy, for the overview. Would anyone like to make a motion? We have two suggested motion options.
Dr. Walker, I'll make the motion to accept staff's recommendation for motion option A. Should I read it, or can we? I have to read.
I can read it if you would prefer.
Thank you.
Sure.
You're awesome.
No problem. So option A would be to rescind the board's prior text approval for this item from September 2024 and instead approve the proposed regulatory text as presented in the meeting materials in attachments A, B, and C, and submit the approved text to the Director of the Department of Consumer Affairs and the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency for review. And if no adverse comments are received, authorize the executive officer to take all steps necessary to initiate the rulemaking process, make any non-substantive changes to the text and the package, and set the matter for a hearing if requested. If after the 45-day comment period, no adverse comments are received and no public hearing is requested, authorize the executive officer to take all steps necessary to complete the rulemaking and adopt the proposed regulations, including the documents incorporated by reference as noticed for Title 16, California Code of Regulations, Sections 1822.51, 1829.2, 1877.2, 1887, 1887.1, 1887.2, 1887.3, 1887.4.2, 1887.4.3, and 1887.12.
She represents me. Teamwork.
All right, do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Who's that on this?
Eleanor.
Eleanor? All right, thank you. Any further discussion? Any comments from our public?
Yes, hello again, Shanti Ezrin with CAMP. Just really quick comments here, appreciating the work from staff to add in some of the proposed changes that you already reviewed, and just wanted to continue to share that we are in general support of the various ways to get continuing education as detailed in the text. And I guess with that, we're just looking forward to engaging further when the public comment period is open. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from our participants in the audience? All right, how about from our remote participants?
We are open for public comment on the motion. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users, dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no online requests, do you wish to continue with the motion?
Yes, thank you, moderator. All right, and with that, Steve, would you take the vote?
I would. So Abigail Ortega,
Yes.
Justin Huff,
Yes.
Christopher Jones,
Yes.
and Wendy Strack,
Yes.
John Sovek,
Yes.
Susan Friedman,
Yes.
Eleanor Uribe,
Yes.
and Annette Walker.
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. All right, next we're on to agenda item number 26. Next on the agenda is discussion and possible action regarding approval of proposed regulatory amendments and preparation of documents to initiate a rulemaking to accept the Association of Marital and Family Therapy Regulatory Board's Marital and Family Therapy National Examination as the clinical examination for California licensure. Roseanne, would you please give us the overview?
Yes, thanks, Chris. So the purpose of this discussion today is to discuss moving forward with the regulations needed to adopt the AMFTRB national exam. So we want to kind of we're doing multiple things at once, kind of with this proposal. We're trying to move it along as quickly as possible and be proactive. So just a little bit of background. As you know, the board is in the process of exploring whether to accept the AMFTRB national exam as the clinical exam accepted by the board for LMFT licensure. Currently, the board utilizes a board-developed clinical exam for LMFT licensure. However, all other states require passing the AMFTRB national exam. The board already has accepted the national examination for both LCSWs and LPCCs, and it's part of the board's strategic plan goal to consider a national exam for LMFT licensure as well. So at the September 2024 meeting, the board discussed acceptance of the national exam in detail, and it voted to begin working toward acceptance of the national exam, but there were several implementation steps that the board wanted to see happen first, or wanted staff to work on. So we're currently working on those. One of those things that we're currently doing is collaborating with AMFTRB on addressing exam content and measurement scope concerns, and making sure that the exam reflects the practice environment in California, for instance. Also collaborating with AMFTRB on addressing accessibility for testing candidates to ensure candidates are not adversely affected by the transition to the exam. For example, where the testing sites are the exam being offered often enough and things like that. So we're working with AMFTRB on that. Also, the board directed staff to work with DCA's Office of Information Service to ensure that a automated system would be in place at the time of the switch for transferring national exam eligibilities and test scores so that everything would be running smoothly. And then finally, the other step that needs to be taken care of is pursuing statutory and regulatory amendments to even allow us to accept the AMFTRB national exam. So that's a two-step process. We're talking about the regulation portion today. In terms of the statute portion, that's kind of step one. The board already approved that language. Statutory changes are needed as a first step, even to allow the board to consider the option of accepting a national exam. The statutes need to list that as a possibility, and so we needed to make some statutory amendments to do that. And the board accepted or approved that language at its September 2024 meeting, and so this year in the board sunset bill, that language will be included to sort of set the stage for that. But that does not pull the trigger to actually accept the national exam. That trigger is actually pulled through accepting regulations and having those be approved by OAL and go into effect. So that's the piece that we're talking about today. Because the statutory process is going to be sort of a year-long process. Legislation is just getting underway right now. Nothing will be signed by the governor likely until about September. That's a long time. So we want to kind of have the regulations ready and waiting so that if the board decides to move forward, let's say this summer, that we kind of have some of that background work done. So that's the purpose of the discussion today. And so proposed regulations, what we're proposing is we have the regulations that we're proposing shown in attachment A. And so they would require an initial review process. They have to go through the director of DCA, the budget office, the California Business Consumer Services and the Housing Agency that oversees DCA, and before they can officially be filed with the Office of Administrative Law for final approval. So we're trying to streamline as much as possible. So what we're recommending today is that the board approve in concept the proposed regulations shown in attachment A. And then once staff has finished collaborating with AMFTRB and OAS to meet the criteria that the board asked for in steps 1 to 3 that's list that I talked about today, we will bring the regulatory, we will have a discussion at the board, an agendized discussion. We'll discuss the progress we've made with AMFTRB, with OAS, the status of the statutory changes, and then we would bring back the regulatory proposal, and that's when the board would vote for final consideration and approval to begin the actual rulemaking process. And so we brought this to the Policy and Advocacy Committee in January, and they recommended that the board consider approving in context the text shown in attachment A and direct staff to begin drafting the initial rulemaking documents. So we have 2 motions today, I'll open it up for discussion, and then I'll read whichever one you choose into the record. But that's where we're bringing this proposal today.
Thank you, Roseanne. Appreciate it. Any comments or questions from the board? Eleanor?
I had a question on attachment A. It has like the old, or actually our current exam fees. Will that be adjusted? Because I know we're talking about changing them temporarily.
So we wouldn't be adjusting it, that would be done through a separate regulation that would handle that as a separately. We wouldn't be adjusting each exam fee line by line.
Yeah. John?
Just going off something that we talked about a moment ago and identifying Pearson VUE specifically in the previous thing, in looking at amending 4980.397, a clinical exam now has the language administered by board, public organization, which has been mentioned above. Do we need, who is going to be administering the California Law and Ethics exam, and do we need to spell that out as well? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. The board administers the
Pearson VUE would still be.
California Law and Ethics exam.
Yeah.
I'm going to defer that to legal counsel.
Yeah.
So I think currently the California Law and Ethics exam is a board exam, and then we have contracted a vendor to implement it. And we're cleaning that up as we go along. And right now we're cleaning it up for the renewal regulation package, or sorry, the continuing education package that includes the renewal provisions and talks to the eligibility requirements. So we're cleaning it up there. This proposal is only for the clinical examination, and what we're trying to get approval for is to begin preparation of the rulemaking file. It would not be submitted unless all the criteria that have been laid out in the memo are met first, and you're comfortable with moving forward to that switch to the national exam. So that's all this item is about. But, of course, as we go along and look at regulations and updates, we'll be keeping in mind the new Office of Administrative Law perspective that we need to specify who does what and what exams need to be exactly specified in regulation versus statute. So in this case, the statute is being hopefully revised, and that was taken care of at another meeting, I believe, right?
Yes.
But what we're looking at in attachment A is just your authorization to begin preparation of the rulemaking file. Normally, we won't prepare the rulemaking file until the board's given its final approval of a text item, but we're trying to get ahead of that so that if there is agreement from this board to make that transition to the national exam, that we don't have a gap, as little a gap as possible between transitioning examinations so that people aren't left in limbo when they're trying to get qualified. So that's all we're trying to do at this meeting is if you otherwise agree to transition from a policy perspective, you've given us approval to begin the process of developing that rulemaking package. And so if you do end up going that way, we can just submit it really quickly for the rulemaking process to do that.
And in hope of moving quickly, maybe consider examining what we need to spell out, because we do have two different exams rather than just one exam. And we may need to pay attention to who is implementing those as this all starts to domino out.
Yeah, I think what would happen is, so the vendor of the California Law and Ethics exam isn't specified in these particular sections, but if we were to touch a regulation section in the future that had that particular language in it, then we would need to possibly make that clarification. But since we're not touching that particular section today, we don't necessarily want to bring extra things into the proposal that could disrupt what our end goal is with this proposal. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. And thank you, Roseanne and Christy, for giving me the exact same message. Thank you. Got it.
All right, thank you, John. Annette?
Yeah, can I make the assumption that this piece that we're working on right now is a living document? So if we needed to come back and do anything or reference other things that we may be overlooking now, that we can come back to it?
Yeah,
Yes,
this is
definitely.
Yes, this is Christy Shilge, Regulations Council. So, like I said, I think we're just trying to get your approval to develop the supporting documentation. And of course, we'd keep it updated as we got closer in time to when things might be signed by the governor if it got to that point. But like I said, normally, like legal, our perspective is we're not going to touch a rulemaking file unless the board has approved the text at a formal noticed meeting. And so that's just our policy because, you know, you're the primary client when it comes to rulemaking here. So we need to have that box checked, and the director won't look at anything either unless this board has approved it. So the idea would be you say, go ahead, I approve in concept subject to these other criteria being met. You can go ahead and begin preparing the supporting documentation so that if we decide at a later board meeting that we're going to do that, then you can submit the rulemaking package relatively quickly and begin the process, because it takes, I know, Christy, a couple months at least to draft a rulemaking package. A couple months. Yes, it's very laborious process. You want to go, if you have trouble sleeping at night, go onto your approved regulations page and just click on some of the initial statements of reasons and see how much work. I mean, the disciplinary guidelines, probably close to 100 pages, right?
115 pages.
15 pages of work product to support those changes. So that's why we're asking for an advanced concept approval so we can get that work done in anticipation of the law change if it happens, like I said.
All right, thank you. Justin?
I'd like to motion to approve the proposed regulatory text in attachment A in concept and complete all of the following actions. Direct staff to draft the initial rulemaking documents in preparation for possible submission to the Director of the Department of Consumer Affairs and Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency for initial review and approval. And once the criterion steps 1 through 3 under section implementation steps set forth in the meeting materials have been met, bring the proposal in attachment A back to the board for final consideration and authorization to submit the rulemaking package to the director and agency for review and approval.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I heard Susan first.
Me too.
She beat you to it just by a hair. All right, any further discussion? The board? Shanti.
Okay, thank you so much. Shanti Ezrin with CAMPT. Wanted to provide comments just thanking the board and also staff for your continued commitment and work in this process to, just in this process in general. We continue to be very supportive of the possible transition to the AMFT-RB national exam. And all that being said, these processes do take quite a bit of time, and we believe that the recommendations set forth by staff today will definitely streamline the process, while the statutory amendments that are necessary are being run as legislation this year. Thank you.
Thank you. Ben.
Ben Caldwell, MFT. I also want to thank you, Roseanne. Thank you, board members, for your continued work on this and the progress that is shown here. It is a long process, and I think all of us understand that. One longstanding issue with AMFTRB has been that it's a pretty opaque organization. For as much as I and others criticize ASWB for its exam stuff, we're only able to do that because ASWB at least makes, excuse me, some disaggregated data public. So I wondered, considering that the BBS has some leverage here as a large market for the national exam, are you able to use this opportunity to push for transparency in terms of exam validation and related data and processes?
I can definitely ask and coordinate with them and see how much we can get. So,
Thank you, Ben. That is the entirety of our in-person audience. Are there any comments from our online participants?
We are open for public comment on agenda item 26 and the motion. If you'd like to make a comment, now is the time to raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users, dial *3. And our first online comment is coming from Anne Tran Lean from CAMPT. Hold on just a moment. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone. Hello. Are you with us?
Hi, thank you. Hello, board members and staff. This is Anne Tranlian, Managing Director of Legal Affairs with CAMPT. And I would just like to reiterate our appreciation to the board and staff, Roseanne and Steve, on forward movement of transitioning to the AMFTRB national exam. We strongly believe that this will help our California licensed MFTs with more expansive opportunities for their careers. We're also dedicated to working with the BBS and AMFTRB to ensure consumer protection, as well as fair, equitable exam access for MFTs. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anne.
And that appears to be our only online request.
All right, thank you, moderator. Further discussion? Oh, all right, with that, Steve, take the vote, please.
Okay. Let's go Annette Walker,
Yes.
Eleanor Uribe,
Yes.
Ben Friedman,
Yes.
John Sovek,
Yes.
Wendy Strack,
Yes.
Christopher Jones.
Yes.
Justin Huft.
Yes.
Abigail Ortega.
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the agenda, item number 27 is the discussion and possible action regarding statutory amendments to the board's retired license requirements. Roseanne?
Thank you, Chris. So the board's retired license status was established in 2011. And the reason that that was established at that time is because previously there was no option really for a license who wished to retire. They either had to place their license in an inactive status and continue paying a biennial renewal fee of half of the normal fee indefinitely, or they could allow their license to become delinquent and then it would automatically be canceled after 3 years. So we at that time put in the option to retire a license so that they could more gracefully exit and have the actual retired license status placed on the website. A license who chooses to retire their license cannot engage in any activity that requires a license, and they have to do a certain number of things. When they want to retire their license, the license either needs to be current and active or it needs to be in an inactive status. The license cannot be suspended, revoked, or subject to any kind of disciplinary action. They need to submit a retired license application and a one-time fee of $40. And then once retired, the retired license does not need to be renewed. A retired license can only be restored for up to 3 years. And to restore the retired license to active status, they need to submit an application to restore, to pay the renewal fee, complete 36 hours of continuing education, and submit fingerprints. However, if a license has been retired for 3 years or more, the applicant must apply for a new license, including paying the new license application fees, meet all current license requirements, pass the licensing exams, and submit fingerprints. So I've included some updated retired license statistics on the second page of this memo. We currently have about 3,000 retired licensees, and occasionally a retired license will change their mind and apply to restore their license to active status. This happens a few times a year. It doesn't happen too often. You'll see a little bit of a spike in 2022 where we had some COVID waivers allowing reactivation ending, and there was kind of a demand created by that waiver. But other than that, it's about 4 to 5 a year roughly that change their mind. But we decided to examine this based on some questions we sometimes got from licensees, and we were seeing that some other boards, including the Board of Registered Nursing, had run some regulations to sort of revamp some of their retired license requirements. So we began exploring this at Policy and Advocacy Committee, and we reviewed several other boards' retired license statutes and regulations. And I've included some of examples of those in attachment B. Originally, we were kind of looking at seeing if we could eliminate the requirement that a retired licensee who wishes to restore their license to active status after being retired for 3 or more years must apply for a brand new license. We had proposed potentially reinstatement for up to 7 years and then a different pathway for reinstatement after 7 years. However, legal counsel had some concerns about unintended consequences of allowing reinstatements after 3 years. And staff had concerns about having different reinstatement requirements. We were going to require law and ethics at a certain number of years, and then a clinical exam at a certain number of years. And then that coupled with the fact that most of our license types have only 2 exams, where our LEPs have only 1 exam, it kind of created a differing and confusing process. And so we thought this might not be the most helpful direction. So we just kind of regrouped and looked at the law again, and really the biggest question or problem we hit with somebody wanting to reinstate a retired license to active status is sometimes somebody will let their active license expire and then want to retire it. That's a big problem that we hear about with then. And then the law, the way that it's written, requires them to either put it in an inactive or an active status in order to go back and then turn around and retire it. So that means that they have to pay either the inactive fee or the active fee, whatever they choose, do CE to reactivate it, and then turn around and pay us another $40 to retire it. And that doesn't really make a lot of sense, and it's kind of an unhappy thing to have to explain. So that was an issue we wanted to focus on with this. So we came up with a solution of in the current proposal. It permits a license that has been expired up to 3 years, so it hasn't canceled yet, to be retired without being while it's expired. Basically, they don't have to reactivate it to retire it. So we're hoping to sort of remove that barrier. That's what we're proposing. One of the pieces we're proposing today. We also are proposing some other clarifications. There was no clarification in the law of what subject to disciplinary action means, so we're trying to make that a little bit more clear. We're specifying what information actually needs to be provided to the board in the application to retire a license and in the application to restore a license to active status. We're specifying the professional title that a retired licensee is permitted to use. We're restricting a retired license to reactivating their license only once. You can't keep retiring and unretiring. You need to go on an active status if you're not sure. It's really meant to be kind of a final thing. And then a few other things. changing some referencing requirements that could be more clear, specifying, making some clarifications about continuing education, about how old it can be and what needs to be taken that could be made more clear, and clarifying that a license that has been retired for 3 or more years cannot under board law be restored. It has to be a new license issued. That's not currently very clear in the law. So the proposal is shown in attachment A, and at the January meeting, our policy and advocacy committee discussed the proposed amendments and directed staff to bring them to the board for consideration as a legislative proposal. So with that, I'll open it up to discussion.
Questions, comments? Justin?
This is a minor question. I have no idea how often this would happen. In my reading of this language, if someone retires a license and then comes back at the end of that 3 years, they are retired again. Is that correct?
If they retire their license and then they just decide they want to reactivate it,
Yes.
no, then they're reactivated.
At the end of that,
At the end of the,
this makes it seem there's no time limit for reactivation, right?
you can reactivate a license within 3 years of retiring it.
Sorry, once they're reactivated, there's no limit on.
There's no limit. Then you can just, if you reactivate, you can keep renewing it. It is active for as long as you want.
And so if they go back into retirement, is it worth noting somewhere in this wording that it is the most recent retirement date?
They can only retire it once. So they can only reactivate it once. So they can only retire it twice. So
I see.
that once they retire it the second time that they're done. That's why we discourage people that aren't sure when we're talking with them in the office. This is really meant as a something that, you know, I'm gonna go retire and tour the world. I have no interest in practicing ever again. This is the option for you. If you're not sure, you really should, we would really encourage those people to go inactive.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Christy.
Susan?
I'm just curious because the numbers are so small. Do a lot of people just stop practicing and never bother to let you know? I mean, you won't know that, but.
They might, and that's what they had to do before, is it was kind of like, well, you can go inactive or you can just let it cancel, but people didn't really like the idea of canceling. They've had a long career. It shows up as canceled on the website. That doesn't necessarily look very nice. So somebody may just choose to have it canceled, or they might keep renewing it and not use it. Maybe they still think they might practice someday, but they're not sure. But this allows the people that are really want to retire an option. No, does it give us a perfect count of how many people are actually using their license? No, it does not, but it at least gives them that option.
Yeah, I'm just curious because you know who renews and the numbers you have here are so small. It just seems like why even waste time worrying about?
Well, I think, aren't those numbers just people who wanted to reactivate an already retired license? So we have a lot more people who have retired, but the chart in there is just people who said, oh, I changed my mind, I want to come back.
Oh,
Yeah.
So yeah, we have about 3,000 retired licensees. Once we retired them, then we found that we did have some people that changed their minds. And so this is trying to accommodate those to the best that we can. You know, we want to be a nothing in life is ever definite 100% sometimes. And so we wanted to give those people, reduce the barriers as much as we can for those individuals, still following our laws and allowing options for them. So no, there's not a very big number. And I'd say probably the biggest question or concern we get when somebody's thinking about retiring is they've already let it cancel and they didn't renew this past renewal period. And now they're calling us and they're saying, well, I don't want to pay to reactivate it and then turn around and pay you another $40 to retire it. And so that this proposal does address that piece, which might lead to a few more. Does everybody necessarily decide to get the retired status? No, probably not.
Well, because it's at some particular point in time, we may discover that we really, really need those people who retired for some, whatever mental health needs we decide.
If a
if a situation comes up like that, like COVID, then there would be a waiver or other kind of procedure where we can help people reactivate for the need.
Okay.
Yeah, you'll see in 2022, we had 2021 to 2022, we had a waiver that allowed people to come back without doing from the retired status. They could reactivate. So a few people you'll see took advantage of that. And then it kind of went back to the regular 3-year rule again. So those situations do come up, but in general, the board statute doesn't allow us to reinstate any licenses after 3 years.
Any further discussion? John?
So understanding that language is important in all of this, and I don't work in the legal field, I'm curious as to where the definition for subject to disciplinary action came from, what language was it built on? Is it standard language used in other boards? Because that was one of the big things that this had to be defined to make this all work.
So I borrowed this language from other regulations we have, including the one that we just passed on the renewal application, so that I know that the Office of Administrative Law has accepted that as an explanation for it being clear enough. So I figured if it's clear enough for regulations, it's clear enough for the statute. So I just borrowed that language from
Okay.
that.
Cool. So then it's already been approved. One of my things that's concerning about the particular language, because I don't think I've seen it in the other context, is that someone's considered to be under disciplinary action when they have an investigation pending. So that is
That's
placing
language
restrictions on
from,
someone.
if you recall the temporary licensure statute that we had for people that relocated to California or veterans. So Assembly Bill 107, remember that bill? And essentially allows people to have a free license if they end up coming to California for like a certain period of time. And they had to have kind of what they call a squeaky clean record in order to get that free license, because we weren't allowed to do any kind of a background check when they came into the state. So I think that's my understanding of where that language came from, to ensure that people aren't taking advantage of this, because most boards don't allow people who've been canceled to come back and apply for a retired license. You would be breaking new ground in that regard. Nobody else allows it. Everybody has to have either an active or inactive license to go retired, because we want to make sure that people have current competencies, and also, if there's any kind of a disciplinary action, they just didn't let their license go to avoid that. So that's why I think that's being built into this proposal, is to make sure that only people that are really truly didn't understand the retirement process and aren't trying to get around a disciplinary action they have on their record qualify after they've canceled. So I think that's where we were going. So it's slightly different. You're right. It's slightly different than some of the other language because of the unusual extension of the retirement allowance to people that have already canceled, or essentially when you cancel, you don't have a license anymore, period. Can't be reinstated or anything. So you're kind of going beyond, an extra step beyond, to help people not have the word canceled, which some people think is discipline. It's not, but canceled on their license when you look them up. So
This is just the way my brain works sometimes. We know in disciplinary actions, we're at around 377 days for an action to go through. Isn't that kind of where we're at time-wise?
I think it was 416.
It's higher than that.
Okay, so let's go even higher than that. So if someone was in a pending investigation, once again, they're not actually being disciplined, they're being investigated, and they've got this 477 days. Will that interfere with the clock on this 3-year ability to reinstate?
If they're reinstating it and they haven't renewed it, yes, but they're gonna cancel anyways. So they would be, if they had decided that I have disciplinary action, I'm not gonna renew my license because I don't know if I'm gonna be able to practice anymore. Their license is either gonna cancel, or they're gonna be able to, that would create a loophole or incentive for them to retire it that we don't want. So they're gonna have to if they want to make sure that they keep their license in some sort of anything other than a canceled status, they're gonna have to renew either active or inactive anyways. So they could still wait it out and see what happens and then retire if they wanted to.
Okay. Any other questions? We have a motion. All right, I'll motion to direct staff to make any discussed changes and any non-substantive changes and to pursue as a legislative proposal.
Justin Huft, second.
Excellent. Further discussion? Audience members?
Audience members, plural this time. Great. Hello, again, Shanti Ezrin with CAMPT. Just wanted to thank staff for your work on this. Really think that the clarifications, as we see in the materials here, are perfectly appropriate as proposed. And also, based off the conversation and everything, just appreciate that one proposed change that allows the expired licenses within 3 years to be retired, because that will be a very helpful piece for the certain individuals that impacts. So that's it, and thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you, Shanti. Ben? Good? All right. How about from our online participants?
We are open for public comment via WebEx on the new motion. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request, you wish to continue with the motion?
Yes, thank you, moderator. All right, Steve, you should take the vote.
Yes, I will. Actually, let's go this way. Sorry. Abigail Ortega.
Yes.
Justin Huft.
Yes.
Christopher Jones. Wendy Strack.
Yes.
John Sovek.
Yes.
Susan Friedman.
Yes.
Eleanor Uribe.
Yes.
And Annette Walker.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. Next on our agenda is item number 28, update on board rulemaking proposals. Roseanne?
Yes, so the legislative session for this year is just getting underway. We had the bill introduction deadlines last week. And so there's a lot of bills that have been introduced. We're currently parsing through those to see which ones affect the board and its professions. And we'll be reporting back on that at the April Policy and Advocacy Committee meeting, and then at the May board meeting for positions. One proposal that the board has several proposals actually out that I've detailed in this update, 1 through 4, several legislative proposals for the year. Those are going to be amended into the board's sunset bill, which has been introduced as SB 775 by Senator Ashby. They have not been amended in yet. They just sort of introduced it as a spot bill, and they've let me know that they are going to be amending those proposals in subsequently, probably in about 30-ish days. So you can look for those to be appearing there. And like I said, we'll be reporting back on other legislation affecting the board in the coming months. You'll be hearing much more from me on that. Thank you.
Comments? Any comments from our board? Justin? Oh. Yep. All right. Any comments from our audience? How about our online participants?
We are open for public comment on agenda item 28. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request, you wish to continue with the agenda?
Yes, thank you. All right, item number 29. is the update on our board rulemaking proposals. Christy.
Thank you.
this over to you.
So the disciplinary guidelines that was approved by the board in August of 2023 was noticed to the public on January 10th, and that comment period just ended February 25th. We did receive one comment, so we'll be bringing that back to the board with a recommended response in May. And then we can continue along after that. The telehealth proposal we just talked about, so you know where we're at there. So we'll be now that you've approved our proposed responses, we'll continue working on the documents necessary to file that package, which have to go through another review process, but we'll get working on that. The continuing education, we just talked about that. Oh, that should have said, the status should have said return for modifications at the February meeting. It says May, so my error there. But anyway, you know about the continuing education. The advertising regulations that were approved in September 2024 has been submitted to the Department of Consumer Affairs for the production phase review. The English as a second language additional examination time, those documents are currently in preparation for the production phase review. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Christy. Any comments, questions from our board? How about from our audience? How about from our remote audience?
WebEx is open on agenda item 29. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. Let's take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to continue with the agenda?
All right, thank you, moderator. Next on our agenda, we're going to go back up to item number 21, which is our board sunset review update. Steve?
Yep. Just a quick update. We did submit the report to the committee, and so they are reviewing it currently right now. What we'll expect is a background paper they should submit to us in the next week or so, kind of giving us an idea of what we might want to look at to discuss at the actual hearing. And the hearing date has changed. It's now March 24th. DCA has been really, they're very helpful in preparing for these, and I attended with staff a mock interview, which was really good. So they kind of grill you just like the legislature. So thank you, DCA. Got us some pointers. It was great. So that is the update.
Any questions or comments? I will be up here to testify with Steve. So you're welcome. It'll be exciting for that to happen. So it was been nice working on the board with all of you, and see you at other boards.
Oh, we'll get in there, hopefully for you.
Any comments from the audience? How about from our remote participants?
We are once again open for public comment via WebEx. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to continue with the agenda?
Yes, thank you. Now we're moving to item number 23, which is the discussion, overview and discussion and possible recommendations on the updates to the board member manual. Steve?
Yes, hi. The last time the board member manual was updated was in 2018. Since that time, we have a full new board, and you may have not had a chance to put any comments or suggestions in that. So I was looking at that and trying to reformat it a little bit to be more concise. And some of the things we've done is also add additional items to like a board members' responsibilities and some tips and some things to pay attention to during the board meeting. Additionally, I don't have them in this actual presentation and the attachments, but looking at actually putting in flowcharts for the enforcement process, licensing process, and budget process so that the board members have some kind of reference to that so they can so it's just good reference materials. This is an early stage draft, so I was just bringing this forward as it is right now to see if there is anything that you would like to include in the board member manual or any suggestions. Please forgive, there's probably a lot of formatting and possibly grammatical errors. I apologize, but I wanted to get this out here so we can try to, with the strategic plan, present something new at the end of the year that we can all actually approve with the strategic plan. So is there any questions?
I read through it, it actually looked pretty good. The only, not the only, but the, one thing I noticed, and this could, if I'm getting stuck on a detail, please tell me. When we're talking about like the travel arrangements, it just mentions Christina by name, which is great because she's fantastic. But if she moves to Hawaii and then isn't here anymore, I don't think she's going to want us to.
No, I can.
Yeah, she's done. She's done. So I don't know if that was just a placeholder or
a personal cell too,
right?
No, we do kind of put those in there, but we could actually. I've always considered that, so we don't have to keep amending it because Marlon's in there too. I'm in there.
Yeah,
and
put the position versus the
and we
person.
can just as an attachment the actual contact form or something like that.
Other than that, that would look great. Yeah. Any other comments or suggestions? How about from our audience?
Ben Caldwell, MFT. There's nothing in that draft that I saw that addresses or even really mentions any specific board member responsibilities related to the board's exam program. And I'd be curious to know from board members, would it be potentially beneficial to include anything about that in the manual? Or does the manual just kind of reflect that the board defers decision-making on the exam program to OPES?
I think that's what we really do. We do defer it to that, but that's something to consider. I know we've had those conversations through email, so I could maybe better define that or put an description in there.
Yeah, I mean, it really was. It was just for discussion.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Any comments from our remote audience?
We are open for public comment via WebEx. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of your screen. Dial-in users, dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. Let's take a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request online, do you wish to continue with the agenda?
Yes, thank you, moderator. Next item on the agenda is item number 30, which is suggestions for future agenda items. Are there any future agenda item suggestions from our board members? Justin.
Thanks. I have 4, and these are mostly revisiting things that I have discussed before. So this is directed in part at Chris, but largely Steve. I've noted before that therapists are put in precarious positions when their employers require them to do engage in behaviors like forcible outing of minor clients. And there's still a lack of clarity and a lack of protection around how licensees should navigate this, especially when their employers are demanding actions inconsistent with professional codes of ethics. And I've requested before that the board consider publishing an official memorandum indicating the board's position in conjunction with professional code of ethics that the board does not support forcible outing of clients in any form. I'm not sure why it has taken this long, but I would like to see some stance on that. The second one is that there are private religious schools across the state that don't abide by Title IX And this includes expelling students for being gay or lesbian. And I am not confident at all that these therapists coming from these programs are receiving culturally competent education consistent with California standards. And I have requested before that the board explore ways to only accept education criteria from schools that fully abide by Title IX without carving out exceptions for religious beliefs. So again, I would want the board to move forward with having conversations about how to pursue that. The third thing I would want to revisit is that there is a rise of online therapy platforms with well-documented problems involving client confidentiality breaches, scope of practice issues, and out-of-state practice. I have also requested that the board explore ways to increase accountability for these online platforms operating within the state. So I would like the board to put that on a future agenda item. And then finally, and these are conversations we've had before, the board has historically remained quite neutral and has approached public statements with a very delicate touch. And this maintains public safety if and only if there are laws and policies already in place and a political culture that protects consumers. And what we are seeing nationally is protections for marginalized communities are being clawed back. And I would like to see the board take a much more proactive and engaged approach in trying to ensure consumer protection is maintained, and doing so through as many different mechanisms as possible. When I look back at the board's attempts to try and address social political threats to our populations, both licensees and consumers, it's basically absent. And that I think is not just a missed opportunity, but an embarrassment. So I would like us to address that. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Any other agenda items? Susan?
Well, I know I have suggested this before, and I think Steve said you were beginning to look into it. But in this particular political climate, I think it would be very interesting to look into what insurance, what therapists are learning from insurance companies, because so many people decide not to deal with therapy because they're worried about insurance. So I think we should have some information at least about that we can intelligently tell our licensees.
Are you clear on what she's asking for?
Yeah.
Okay. John?
And actually, based on both of these thoughts that just came out, looking at the board, developing a guide for therapists to create legal and ethically sound notes that can be protective of clients' information. If there's a way to build a guidance piece on that.
Good, okay. And the practice is that, Steve will reach out and meet with each of you to flush out exactly what it is that you're looking to throw on an agenda, and then whether or not it's, within the board's purview to do, then we will do that. Any future agenda item suggestions from our in-person audience?
Ben Caldwell, MFT. I'm going to talk fast. In 2016, at the time the board was implementing what was then the new law and ethics exams, I brought to the board the question of which code of ethics, AAMFTs or CAMFs, was quote unquote correct for exam purposes. There are many substantive differences between the codes, where behavior that's considered unethical under one code may be allowed under the other. For 9 years now, neither the board nor OPES has publicly answered that question. Examinees continue to fail their exams, both law and ethics and clinical, which also includes ethics content, not because they lack ethical knowledge, but because OPES has for 9 years failed to uphold a basic tenet of fairness in testing, one that is specifically required by the AERA standards that they claim to follow. The notion that examinees have a right to know what they're being tested on. At the same time, the known issues with the ASWB clinical exam continue to mount. In decades of use, the only thing that exam has actually been demonstrated to test for in peer-reviewed research is whiteness. And my own peer-reviewed research shows that all clinical exams in mental health care exhibit significant failures related to construct clarity, validity, fairness, and statistical analysis. Therefore, I'd respectfully request that fairness and equity in the board's testing program be brought forward this year as a future agenda item. I'd be happy to coordinate with staff to provide experts who can testify on the issue and to provide the available studies to hold test developers accountable and to ensure that the tests you rely on are actually fair and actually protect public safety. Current evidence strongly
15 seconds.
suggests that neither is true. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Any future agenda items from our online participants?
WebEx is open for future agenda items. If you'd like to make a suggestion, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise a hand. We will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take a few seconds to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no online requests, do you wish to continue?
Yes, thank you, moderator. Next item on the agenda is public comment for items that are not on the agenda. I'll now open for public comment for items that are not on the agenda. As a reminder, the board may not discuss or take action on any matter raised during this public comment section, except to decide whether to place the matter on the agenda of a future meeting. Each commentator will have 2 minutes. Are there any comments from our board members? Ben, welcome back.
Ben Caldwell, MFT. I won't need to talk as fast on this one. I wonder whether the board might be willing to consider adjusting the agenda for future meetings to put the executive officer report before all of the disciplinary stuff on Thursday. That report has traditionally offered a great opportunity for some more informal kind of dialogue with Steve and with staff. And with it at the end of the Thursday agenda, we as stakeholders can't know whether that report's going to be at like noon or like 5 p.m. So it makes attendance and participation much more challenging. So if you could consider that change in the agenda, I think you'd get greater involvement from attendees. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments from our in-person participants? No? All right. How about any comments from our online participants?
We are open for public comment on agenda item 31. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. Let's take a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to continue with the agenda?
Yes, thank you, moderator. With that brings us to our final agenda item, adjournment. Thank you for participating today. I hope that we will see you all the next week.
My apologies.
Oh.
We have a late hand up. Will you take it?
Oh, I guess we'll take it. Just
All
this
right.
time.
Thank you so much. Elise Springer, hold on just a moment. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone. All right, I see you're unmuted. Are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Go ahead, please.
Great, thank you. Hello, Elise Springer, marriage and family therapist, volunteer board member for California Postpartum Support International. I've come a couple times just really wanting to request that the board consider adding perinatal mental health as a continuing education unit and in accordance with 2581, AB 2581. Just another request that you give us a hearing on including perinatal mental health in California. We've got 1 out of every 3 new mothers, birthing parents struggling with perinatal mental health, 1 in every 10 fathers. And, there's a lot of adverse childhood experiences that are occurring as a result of lack of diagnosis, and trained providers. Just really want the board to consider it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that was our last request for public comment.
All right, thank you, moderator. And with that, we've reached adjournment. Thank you all for attending. We hope to see you at our next board meeting on May 8th and 9th. Meeting adjourned.